Chapter 779. P.S. 500 votes plus an update. Please support me. Last month's results were not good. I hope it will improve this month. Friends who read the pirated version. The original version is only enough for breakfast every month. With you, sloth will have the motivation, Xia Bingji said cautiously. But what Tongwang said about the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce's method of discovering the truth is very credible. At that time, other than the three of us, there was no one alive. That golden eagle is very cunning. In fear of human revenge, it will definitely lead its people away from the sea of clouds outside Red Hill. All spiritual birds will leave, but not those ordinary birds. They don't have the ability to move long distances, so it's very possible that one or two of them were caught. Inu was skeptical. What do you and I look like in the eyes of the ordinary birds? Can they recognize us? Aura, spiritual opportunity, I don't think they have such abilities. Xia Bingji sighed. They don't need to recognize people. They can't do that. But your cloud-piercing bear is too different. As long as the ordinary birds see Ba Jie picking his wife, you and I can't escape suspicion. Inu suddenly understood. The way the three of them sat on two people was seen by many people in the sea of clouds near Red Hill. It was indeed a huge loophole. So she asked, Sister Bing, do you mean to leave after the auction? Xia Bingji nodded. Zhou Xian has its own rules. In this sense, it's not a problem for us to kill that Chu Sheng. But it's also a rule. It's not a problem for the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce to make trouble for us as long as their Yuanying ancestor doesn't come out. We have two choices. One is to stay in Red Hill and ally with the upper sex here. The Chamber of Commerce won't dare to do anything. The other is to leave quickly. What's your choice? Inu was very straightforward. We've done what we should do. After the auction, we just need to find out who the Foundation establishment female cultivators were sold to. Then, we'll have completed our mission and can leave immediately. Xia Bingji nodded. They were both smart people. It was impossible for them to be in cahoots with the 9 upper sex. Putting aside the fact that their relationship was complicated, what they were doing now was actually targeting all the upper sex, or the upper sex who had colluded with the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce. How many intersect disciples were there at the auction? What were they doing here? How many of them were there for the real spirit beasts? How many of them had offered a price in human trafficking, including Tongwang? Since you want to do this, you shouldn't rely on them in the process. Otherwise, if they help you and you expose their human trafficking, what would that be? The two of them were not as inexperienced as imagined. To be able to hang around in the yellow court small antechamber for so long, they had abundant experience and a keen sense of life and death. Actually, for the sake of safety, they should have swiftly left after Tongwang's warning. That would have been the best plan, but there was still a sliver of luck. If he wanted to find out who had taken over the human trafficking, he could only wait until the end of the auction, when the cultivators were collecting their auction items. If he missed this time, where would he find him in the vast sea of people? Their plan was purely an action of their own will. So they took advantage of the Guangqing Palace's failure to leave the small antechamber to make time for themselves. This was their secret. Of course, there were other like-minded people in the Yellow Court Mountain and other upper sects. The only thing they had in common was that they were dissatisfied with the position of Kuan cultivators in the Zhou upper realm. The two of them were advocates and needed to set an example. Some dangers must be tolerated. It was only at this moment that the two of them began to regret their nosy joke in Yanhai. It was such a coincidence, but after someone died, it brought them so much trouble. Hopefully, that Tongwang was only scaring them for his own purposes. Inu suddenly realized a problem. Sister Bing, if the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce is investigating, they won't be able to escape. He doesn't have so many guests from all over to cover him. Will he be in danger? Xia Bingji smiled bitterly. He's a great thief and a habitual offender. He's smarter than a monkey when he's stained with fur. His sword is more dangerous than Yuanying. What can happen? He'll only be in danger if we're around. Without us, Red Earth Chamber of Commerce won't be able to trap him. I have a feeling that if something really happens this time, we might lose the chance to continue traveling with him. At least, temporarily. Inu pursed her lips. We didn't tell the truth. But isn't he the same? It's not like we're lying. And it's best to meet him when we go out. Although this person has a lot of secrets, he's still very competent as a hired thug. Xiao Bingji looked at her and smiled. Aya, if you keep him hanging like this and don't give him any practical benefits, won't he fall off the hook? Inya gave her a sideways glance. If I give him benefits, he won't have any motivation. On this point, Sister Bing, you might not have any experience. How about Sister Bing, just give him some benefits? We've been together for a while now. I see that Sister Bing isn't as cold to him as she is to others. Amidst the two's laughter, the auction came to an end. What surprised the guests was that the 3 batches of 30 Foundation establishment female cultivators that had been auctioned off were once again arranged in front of the stage. The host also changed from his previous relaxed and humorous attitude to a serious expression. Dear guests, perhaps everyone has doubts about this batch of Foundation establishment female cultivators that have appeared again. Why do we have to do it again after auctioning them off once? I have to say that something has happened. It's against the rules of the Chamber of Commerce. For the safety of the guests here, we have to make some bad things public. Xia Bingji and Inya looked at each other and saw a trace of uneasiness in each other's eyes. Both of them quietly prepared to rush out. The host sneered. On these Foundation establishment female cultivators' bodies, we've discovered some kind of trace. The method is very clever, but it can't escape the eyes of the Red Hill people. Then, who was the one who tampered with the auction process? Did you step forward, or should I call out the names? Xiao Bingji sighed and pulled Inya's hand, and the two of them floated out. She was in a sudden change, but she didn't panic. She knew that if she didn't handle it well, they would be attacked by everyone. This was trampling on the rules, very taboo behavior. Xiao Bingji pulled back her veil and was calm and composed. We did it, all for the sake of figuring out the bad habit of human trafficking in the Zhou upper realm that hasn't stopped for tens of thousands of years. After figuring it out, we'll make a public announcement in the Zhou upper realm, spread the news, and let the power of public opinion stop all of this. The ones who helped us do all of this might be by your side. Your Dao companions, senior sisters, and female relatives. The Zhou upper realm calls itself the #1 realm in the universe, but has always had this kind of bad habit. #1 realm? It doesn't live up to its name. There are many opportunities to make money, countless ways to do business, but you choose to use this kind of method to satisfy your perverted hobby. I look down on you. Today's failure is because we're not as good as others. We won't continue, but this doesn't mean that we'll stop this kind of exposure. Unless the human trafficking stops, we'll never stop our efforts, even if we have to pay with our own lives. One last thing, this is our personal choice. It has nothing to do with Huangting Taoism. Chapter 780. Hand in hand, the two rose into the air and headed straight for the sea of clouds. It was obvious that whoever tried to stop them would be their mortal enemy. Xiao Bingji's reaction was very correct. The Red Earth Merchant Guild chose to expose them at this time to use the anger of the guests to cover up their true intention, to avenge Chu Sheng. Inya's positioning spiritual tool came from the Yin family's ancestor, a perfected monarch. It was not difficult to hide it from the Jin Dan present. But the problem was that Inya's cultivation was limited and could not do all this silently. She could not fully unleash the full power of the spiritual tool given by the ancestor. The cultivation world was still a world where one's cultivation level determined everything. Because of Chu Shang's death, the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce had eventually discovered their identities and had specific targets. Also, considering the nascent soul stage cultivators behind the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce, it was only natural that they would notice their tricks. A merchant guild was a merchant guild. They did not think of problems like robbers and assassins. They simplified things. This was refreshing, but it would leave behind endless troubles. If something really happened to two Golden Court realm female cultivators with great backgrounds, even if the entire Red Earth Merchant Guild would be unlucky, the Red Earth Merchant Guild would definitely be unlucky. It would not be over until a few of the Yuanying behind them died. Therefore, they had to consider the methods. Since these two women did not know the immensity of heaven and earth and were still working for women's rights, then using the anger of the guests present to deal with them was the best choice. It was because Xia Bingji had considered all of this that she spoke of everything openly. If she really made it clear, when faced with two charming beauties from the Yellow Court sect, one of the 9 great sects, just because they were extremely hateful feminists, would they gang up on them? No one would do that. Even if they were extremely dissatisfied, even if most of the upper sects here had competed in the human trafficking and gained something, they would not do that. This was the constraint of morality. Even if they did not care about morality in their hearts, they had to maintain a sanctimonious appearance on the surface. Only then would they have a chance to leave the auction house. There were many enemies, and they had to calm these guests down because they would encounter an even more important enemy, the assassins sent by the Red Earth Merchant Guild. The Merchant Guild's enemies would not let them go. However, it wasn't on the Red Hill continent, but in the Sea of Clouds. And now, other than leaving Red Hill, there was no other way. If they stayed here, the news of what they had done would spread. Perhaps the cultivators of the 9 great sects would still exercise self-discipline and not interfere. However, the majority of the cultivators here were from the 3,000 unorthodox sections. Many of them were inextricably linked to human trafficking. Making the entire nation your enemy is the true definition of being unable to escape even if you have wings. If he left now and went to the Cloud Sea, he could at least struggle for a bit and still have a chance to live. Tongguang watched as the 2 women rose into the sky and left. He resisted the urge to rush over and stand beside them. He knew very well that if he rushed over now, although his life and death was uncertain, his pursuit of the grand scheme would definitely take a turn for the better. But at the same time, he would forever lose the right to cultivate in peace. Which was more important? He had done his duty. He only revealed the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce's search operation after the 3rd Kuin cultivator auction. He couldn't say it too early, because he might get himself into trouble. His conversation with the 2 girls was seen by others, and because he got close, the 2 girls lost their positions. That could only mean that he was the one who leaked the information. A cultivator's self-preservation was the most important thing. He also couldn't say it too late, because if he did, the 2 girls wouldn't have time to escape. If the 2 were smart enough, they would have left immediately after he reminded them. The Chamber of Commerce wouldn't have had time to make arrangements. They had also just confirmed that the 2 girls were the ones who attacked the young master, Chu Sheng, in the Cloud Sea. Unfortunately, the 2 girls were too greedy and still wanted to complete their great feat of women's rights. Now, although Xia Bingji's response was very smart and temporarily dispelled the hostility of the guests present, in the Cloud Sea, there were already many cultivators who obeyed the orders of the Chamber of Commerce. In Red Hill, there was never a lack of cultivators who took risks for resources. They were all traveling cultivators who went to the 3,000 big and small continents. Where could they find the money? In the end, he didn't choose to stand out because the 2 girls' persistence was somewhat dissuasive. No one wanted their Tao companion to be a defender of women's rights. It was okay to take the upper hand occasionally, but if it was always like this, there were several guests who had the same mentality as him. They were all admiring the Huangting twins, but at this time, none of them were willing to stand out. This was a real mature cultivation world, so naturally, there were many mature cultivators. How could it be possible to expect them to risk everything for the sake of women? In the complicated eyes of the guests present, the 2 girls rose into the Cloud Sea like real fairies. You could say that they were fishing for fame, or that they didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. However, they were so fearless of death. Even if it was ridiculous in their hearts, when they rose into the sky alone, they were still a little touched, and a trace of admiration appeared in everyone's hearts. With persistence, there was a future, and there was a possibility. Ridiculous? What if they looked at it again thousands of years later? Maybe it would be respectable. The 2 fairies in the sky weren't as ethereal as they thought. Inya kept scolding them. Where's One Ear? When it was time for him to do something, there was no trace of him. Sister Bingji, I'm a little regretful. If only I had given him some benefits back then, at least he would have reaped the benefits. Xia Bingji said, Aya, you damned wench. Why are you still saying such crazy things at this time? I've already decided on the Huangting twins' location. Quickly take out the flying spirit tool. Later, you control the cloud-piercing bear. I'll deal with the pursuers. The two girls set up the cloud-piercing bear and moved forward at full speed. They had already felt the faint fluctuations of spiritual vigor around them. That was someone secretly trailing them. They were too close to Red Hill, so these people weren't in a hurry to make a move. Clearly, the Chamber of Commerce still hoped to deal with them in the depths of the Cloud Sea to avoid the pressure from the Huangting Taoism. This was their only chance. After a few hours, the cloud-piercing bear suddenly changed direction. It no longer flew towards the Huangting continent, but towards the Huangting continent and the Taishan continent. This was their little trick. In fact, as long as it was any continent, it could be their target. The 9 great sects were not connected, but their pride was interconnected. They wouldn't allow these unorthodox sects to be impudent in their own continent. However, because of geographical reasons, they actually didn't have much room to choose. They only had the Huangting continent, the Taishan continent, and the 10,000 Buddha continent to choose from. After a few hours, the fluctuations of spiritual vigor around them became more and more obvious. This was the rhythm of the battle. In terms of equipment, although the cloud-piercing bear was a first-class flying spirit tool, flying in the Cloud Sea required experience. However, they were lacking in this aspect. They couldn't compare to those evil guests who spent all their time in the Cloud Sea. Chapter 781. The first wave was made up of 3 cultivators, who were also the closest to them. For the Chamber of Commerce's bounty, these individual cultivators were going all out. The real Chamber of Commerce's people would not appear until the very end, because they were local tyrants and could not run for their lives like individual cultivators. This was Little Continent's fear of the Divine Mountain Continent. They cared a lot about the rules, because only if they followed the rules, the 9 upper sects would follow the rules. Inya focused on controlling the load and was also in charge of the main defense. This was her specialty, or rather, this was her wealth. Jean Dan's hundreds of years of treasures were given by the patriarch, the sect, her own savings, and gifts from her pursuers. Among them, Blue Butterfly was just one of them. Now, she was using 3. The outer layer was Sky Flower Rain, the middle layer was Smoke Shield, and the inner layer was Blue Butterfly. She still had 3 in her hand and several more in her storage ring. Defensive spirit tools were hard to come by, but this concept did not apply to her. The truth was, for rich people, they did not need the right one, only the expensive one. Xia Bingji was on the other side of the load, in charge of attacking the pursuers. This method sounded very thorough, but the two of them quickly realized that the effect wasn't very good. It was not that the other party could threaten them, but they could not effectively attack the pursuers. As they ran, Xia Bingji's attacks were not effective because this was not a normal way of fighting. A normal way of fighting should not be to run all the way, but to go back and forth, looking for an opportunity in the exchange of spells. If they kept running, more and more pursuers would only gather. If they stopped and fought to their heart's content, they would delay time and more pursuers would gather. There was no solution. The two girls were a little depressed. Why was the battle always so simple and clear when it came to one ear, but when it came to them, they were in a dilemma? Inya gritted her teeth. Sister Bing, this won't do. Let's find an opportunity to attack together and try to kill one. Otherwise, it won't be good if this drags on. They're deliberately using powerful spells, not to do anything, but to send a message to the surroundings. The two of them had made up their minds. When the 3 pursuers approached to attack again, Inya's spiritual weapon suddenly changed. The rain veil and smoke shield suddenly disappeared. Blue Butterfly suddenly shone brightly, turning the surrounding clouds indigo. This was the cornerstone of the power of water. Xia Bingji cooperated well with her. An ink dragon was formed and swallowed one of the trapped cultivators. At the same time, Inya's spiritual weapon, the water sickle blade, was activated. Countless flat water sickles that looked like wind blades flew towards the cultivator from all directions. Concentrating your strength to beat up one person was a simple battle concept, but it was also the most practical. Because the two of them had been running the entire time in the beginning, and there were also 2 earth cultivators. The 3 individual cultivators gradually relaxed their guard. The joint attack was very sudden, but the effect was obvious. The person dodged and defended with all his might to avoid the suction of the ink dragon's hammer, but he was cut by several water scythes. His whole body was bathed in blood, and his injuries were extremely severe. This was where the turning point began. Whether it was cultivation or spiritual weapons, the 2 earth cultivators had the upper hand. The only thing they lacked was experience, and they didn't know the details of the battle between individual cultivators. In their opinion, this individual cultivator had already lost his ability to fight and would definitely withdraw from the battle. They turned their attention to the other 2 individual cultivators' crazy attacks, but they didn't expect that the heavily injured individual cultivator not only didn't retreat, but also bumped into them mountain separation, a very ordinary spell, but because it was used at the right time, it created a dangerous situation for the 2 women. The 2 of them were separated. Because Enya was the controller of the cloud-piercing pole, she could still sit in the middle, but on the other side, Xia Bingji wasn't so lucky. She was separated by the mountain. How could she turn back? The remaining 2 individual cultivators were very good at seizing opportunities. They immediately each entangled one opponent, making it impossible for them to form a joint attack. A counterattack, the first half was excellent, but the second half was terrible. Originally, this didn't mean much. Even if they fought alone, the 2 women each had the advantage. Enya won in terms of the quality of her spiritual weapons, while Xia Bingji won in terms of cultivation and sharp moves. But what was worse was that there were 2 auras coming from the side. Bad things. This was the first thought of the 2 women. Once they were entangled, they might not be defeated easily, but as long as they dragged on, it wouldn't take long before more and more people gathered. This net would become denser and denser, so denser that they couldn't escape even if they had wings. They wanted to escape, but their opponents were all experienced fighters. How could they not understand what they were thinking? They fought with all their might to hold them back. The 2 fresh troops also came with unusual speed. 1 person each, they pounced on the 2 of them. Among them, the one targeting Xia Bingji was obviously an individual cultivator because he directly pounced on her and his mouth was dirty. "Little girl, why don't you just surrender? If you make this brother angry, I'll spank you naked later." Xia Bingji's attacks weren't that fierce in nature, but she was difficult to deal with because when the opponent's attack strength increased, the strength of her counterattack would increase. This was a kind of rebounding skill system. It was very effective against 1 person, but it was somewhat unsuitable when dealing with many people. When the cultivator who was fighting with her saw that his helper was so reckless, he wanted to remind him, but he restrained himself and let him try the close combat defense of this Kuan cultivator. Anyway, body cultivators had rough skin and thick flesh. Anyway, these pursuers were also competitors, and they weren't familiar with each other. What surprised him was that the body cultivator's fierce attack was like a hot knife through butter. When he pursed his lips and whistled, he seemed to release a magical power. He easily passed through the defense of the Kuan cultivator and broke into the forbidden area. What magical power was this? It could make the defense of the Kuan cultivator useless. It could make him feel nothing, but his own magical attack couldn't break through the defense of the Kuan cultivator. How strange. When his attention was focused on this body cultivator's miraculous breakthrough, when he saw that the body cultivator had already grabbed Kuan Xiu's waist with 1 hand and was about to slap his buttocks with the other, such an easy victory made him a little dumbfounded. Therefore, when he felt a burst of pain from his heart and felt something explode in his body, he still couldn't understand what he was seeing. That explosive force was controlled in a miraculous manner. It was confined to his body, and not a single bit of energy leaked out. No one could see what had ambushed him, including himself. He couldn't even understand before he died. Didn't he already succeed? How could he die? This didn't make any sense. The body cultivator grabbed Xia Bingji's belt. Being grabbed by the waist by a body cultivator was basically a hopeless situation. His other hand fiercely slapped Xia Bingji's plump butt. This made the two scattered cultivators who were watching the battle not far away overjoyed. Chapter 782. The Body Cultivator laughed. Coming early is not as good as arriving at the right time. Do you two need my help? The Body Cultivator was so fierce. Although the two were worried that the credit would be taken away, they were still happy to save some trouble. The key was that there were too many people in this Kuin Shio's storage ring. There were so many of them that they didn't have the confidence to control her in a short time. Then I'll have to trouble you. The Body Cultivator chuckled and threw Xia Bingji forward, reminding her to stay calm. Help me watch her for a while. Don't touch her. She's my trophy. If you have any ideas, I'll be angry. Xia Bingji felt that her body was flying forward. She looked at her opponent, who was excitedly opening his big hands. She was thinking about what to do when she got close to him, but she didn't expect that her consideration was unnecessary. When she was less than 100 zhang away from her opponent, she suddenly felt a cold sensation below her abdomen. Even though it didn't touch her body, the killing intent hidden within made her feel a deep sense of fear. It was as if the god of death had just passed by her abdomen. 1,000 feet was the distance of the god of death. When the Body Cultivator realized that something was wrong, the sea of clouds suddenly burst out with light. This time he saw it clearly. It was flying swords, countless flying swords. The flying swords circled in the sky and suddenly gathered. They gathered and slashed, cutting his companion into two pieces. The Body Cultivator wondered why he was the only one who survived. The silent shadow of the god of death had penetrated his body and exploded instantly. Blood spurted out. Xia Bingji was so angry that she had to set up a shield to prevent her white robe from turning red. The rabbit rose, and the falcon fell in just a few seconds. The Body Cultivator didn't stop. He turned into a stream of light and jumped to the side of the clouds. At the same time, a sword sound was heard. A flying sword flew far away and disappeared into the clouds. Then, another wave of spiritual energy came from the depths of the clouds. That was the first rogue cultivator who was seriously injured and could not fight, but was reluctant to run far away. He originally did not want to miss this merit, but in the end he was shocked by the unforeseen event that happened in front of him. One of his souls left his body, and 3 of his souls worshipped the heavens. How could he run away from the swordsman's sword with such injuries? Enya shouted loudly and was very dissatisfied. One ear. Why are you grabbing my senior sister's waist? You even took pictures of her there? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. At this time, there was still someone who was in the mood to be jealous? Women are really hard to raise. I can't save you, but I can't not save you either. All right, the next time I catch you, I'll film you, okay? Without waiting for the angry Enya and the slightly absent-minded Xia Bingji to speak, he gave the order as if it was a matter of course. I'll sit on a cloud-piercing pole. They flew straight to the nearest continent, the Golden Court continent. I will protect you from the shadows. Just like this time, Enya was not happy. She realized that she would easily lose her temper in front of this thief. She acted like she couldn't control herself. Stupid ears. If there are too many people chasing after you, you can openly choose not to show up and run away. Lu Xiaoyi laughed heartily. His figure flickered and he disappeared, leaving behind a sentence. You made progress. You've guessed correctly. If there are more people, I'll slip away. If there are fewer people, I'll attack. In any case, the two of you are so beautiful. There's no need for a real fight. You just have to lift your skirts, and everything will be fine. Enya said hatefully, that heartless pervert. Other people want nothing more than to take care of their female companions and dote on them. He likes to use them before and wants nothing more than to push them out to be enjoyed by others before it's his turn. He thinks he can be irresponsible like this. I've lived for a few hundred years, but I've never seen such a pervert. Xia Bingji was speechless. He has such a hobby. What's wrong with him? Enya drew out the cloud-piercing bear as she explained, Sister Bing, think carefully about what he asked when we first met at the entrance of Guangqing Palace. When we said we didn't have a Tao companion, his face was filled with melancholy, loneliness, regret, and regret. The heavens are blind. How could they give birth to such a strange thing? Xia Bingji sighed. Perverted person, perverted sword. That ear allowed them to fly straight to the Golden Court continent, but it didn't mean that their previous uncertain route was wrong. With their strength, they could only choose this uncertain route to reduce the possibility of being surrounded and annihilated. But different people had different tactics. For a ferocious person like One Ear, of course, they should choose to travel in a straight line. In any case, he killed quickly. If one came, he would kill one. If two came, he would kill two. He would be able to break through the danger zone in the shortest time possible. Although she was very proud because of her Dao heritage, her looks, her master, and her talent, these were meaningless in front of this bandit. This bandit One Ear only knew how to kill. And in the cultivation world, this was the most useful rule. Everything else was nonsense. She finally understood that a battle wasn't as simple as comparing data. Her Jean Dan's late-stage cultivation was useless. Her special skill was useless. Aya's countless spiritual weapons were useless. Her strange sprite was useless. What was useful? It was talent, intuition, experience, perfect use of the environment, sharp observation of the enemy's mentality, shamelessness, filth, and unscrupulous means to achieve one's goal. They didn't have any of these. That was why the two of them couldn't immediately finish off the three individual customers who were weaker than them. However, under the disgusting bandits' playful attacks, in just a few breaths of time, 4 of them were killed. How terrifying were the people who survived the heaven and earth chessboard. And that Tai Xian's Quan, Su, was probably such a person. To them, killing was an instinct, an art, and a way to do as they pleased. The more this was the case, the more extraordinary their strength could be, and they would never be as timid as them. Kuan cultivators needed such thugs to protect their rights. She gently caressed her buttocks. This bastard was very heavy-handed. He even seemed to have pinched her. Xia Bingji had cultivated for hundreds of years and had always been self-disciplined. But now, she suddenly felt that she might have to jump into the hole she had dug herself. Aya, next time, if we only encounter 2 or 3 pursuers, we won't tangle with them. We'll just keep running. If there are more people, we'll close the door. Inya grunted, but didn't answer the question. Sister Bing, I feel that you're a little strange now. You're being manipulated, but you're not angry. This isn't the original you. Xia Bingji was a little flustered. She and Inya had been sisters for hundreds of years. She knew this girl's thoughts. She was really jealous. The best way to deal with her thoughts was to tell the truth. I plan to give him some benefits. For things like this, we can't just leave it hanging. Otherwise, if we get separated in the battle this time, what reason can we use to find him again? Could it be that after we've been used? Anyway, I'm not willing to do that. Inya pecked at the rice. I'm not willing either. Chapter 783. A few moments later, there were more scattered guests surrounding them. This time, there were 5 of them at once. Obviously, these people had gathered together before they chose to make their move, including that ear. The choice of the Chamber of Commerce was to reward different groups of assassins, thieves, and roaming criminals to achieve their goals. This way, it was easier for them to clear their names. But the disadvantage of doing this was that these groups were not familiar with each other. Moreover, everything had happened too quickly and too suddenly. Lu Xiaoyi had killed the 3 cultivators who had besieged him in an instant. Before the news had spread, everyone had already begun to fight for supremacy in the Sea of Clouds. How could they have the time to distinguish between 2 targets, but 3? They thought that the male cultivator had already been killed in Red Hill. Lu Xiaoyi took advantage of the chaos to make his move. Because the 2 girls knew what was going on, their cooperation was perfect, and they were very confident. Reality proved that when there was a good backbone, a strong battle power that they could rely on, the 2 girls could fully display their strengths. 3 against 5, but there was no suspense at all. It was settled cleanly, as easy as hunting in the field, which made the 2 girls sigh endlessly. This time, Lu Xiaoyi fulfilled Inya's wish, using her as a human weapon, and took advantage of her ruthlessly. There is nothing wrong with going through fire and water for others, first collecting some interest. Yu was a little excited because she had been pinched a few more times, and in comparison, she had the upper hand. 1 year. If we do this, we will be able to return to the Yellow Court very quickly. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Please, how stupid would others have to be to keep cooperating with us in this show? I estimate that I have at most one more chance, and then we will be discovered. And the Chamber of Commerce's organized interception has not started yet. You'd better be alert and prepare for the worst. This was not to scare them. The individual customers would soon discover that something was wrong. Moreover, he couldn't always be so lucky to kill all the witnesses. There would always be smart ones, lucky ones, and cautious ones. Just like this time, a famous individual customer had almost escaped from his pursuit. The rational use of tactics would never change the strategic disadvantage. They were few in number, and the return route was clear. This was an unavoidable problem. Only 1 day had passed, and the return journey would take half a month. Now, it had only just begun. On the third day, Lu Xiaoyi sneaked into a team of 7. The leader was very cautious. He clearly said that there was something strange about the 2 women and that there might be other helpers hiding behind them. He warned everyone to be careful when fighting and to always have 2 people on the outside to react to changes. Thus, Lu Xiaoyi knew that this might be his last chance to fish in troubled waters. It was worth it to be able to use such a shameless technique 3 times. After besieging the 2 women, he had been waiting for an opportunity to wipe them out. Even though the 2 women were having a hard time holding on, they were full of fighting spirit and confidence because they knew he was right beside them. However, Lu Xiaoyi didn't find such an opportunity in the end. The individual guests were all good at sneaking around in the sea of clouds. When they gathered their spirits, it was impossible for them not to miss a single person in a pure sneak attack. The battle soon began. After a short period of intense fighting, 3 of the 6 individual customers were killed and 2 were injured. At the same time, 3 of them managed to escape. Lu Xiaoyi's existence could no longer be concealed. Lu Xiaoyi once again shouldered the burden. He comforted the 2 women. Actually, you don't have to worry too much. The reason why I want you to fly straight to the Imperial Court is to prevent them from gathering too many people. Speed is the key to survival. This is also the reason why I want to end the battle quickly. You must also be prepared for this. Don't be as slow as before. If you choose to take risks, you must take risks. Even if you fight for a moment longer, it is still good, because this means that many people may not be able to keep up with our pace. Don't stop. Even if you are in battle, you must set a direction and fly forward. Idao, your mission is to maintain your direction and fly at full speed. Then, take out all your treasures and prepare the defenses around the cloud-piercing pole. Your senior sister and I may attack with all our strength. Then, your place will be our last harbor. If you don't work hard and stingy, I will run away. Inya curled her lips. Running away alone has always been your choice. Do you think we don't know? Don't worry, I have a lot of treasures in my ring. I haven't even taken out half of them. Lu Xiaoyi looked at Xia Bingji again. Use more offensive delaying techniques, single target or area of effect. Leave the killing to me. The order of orthodoxy is swordsman, body cultivator, and spell cultivator. The order of mentality is whoever rushes the most resolutely, who is the most ferocious, and who is in charge will be dealt with first. The order of command is the cultivators of the Chamber of Commerce first, then the individual cultivators. Xia Bingji nodded solemnly and did not refute. She was very clear that the key to escaping was to trust the professionals. Just from the arrangement, she could understand the underlying weakness of human nature. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. I will say this one last time. It is best that the 2 of you do not separate, but you must each prepare a flying spiritual artifact to leave. I cannot guarantee that we will always be together. The worst-case scenario is that you will face the situation of escaping alone. What I can do is to lure away the strongest enemy for you. Inya mumbled, Is it that serious? 1 year, don't scare me. Lu Xiaoyi said indifferently. Consider the worst-case scenario and work hard in the best direction. When cultivators reach the cloud sea, they're no different from birds. Do you think this is the same as on Yellow Court Mountain? More than a dozen lives have been lost. How can there be a peaceful solution? Xiao Bingji apologized. I am sorry. It is all our fault. We killed Chu Sheng by mistake first and caused trouble in the auction house. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. I killed him. Actually, in the eyes of others, none of us can escape responsibility. So there is no need to be so clear. They will not forgive me just because you were the ones who had the idea, and they will not let you go because I was the one who did it. This is the cultivation world. Once you are involved, you'll not be able to pull yourself out. Inya was not convinced. 1 year. We want to abolish human trafficking and bring justice to the Zhou continent. We want to benefit the world so that there will be no more brothels in this world, no more wives and concubines, and everyone can live happily. Are you willing to stand on our side? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. Abolishing human trafficking, I fully support this. But abolishing brothels and marrying a few more wives, don't we have to discuss it again? There is no need for these two things to be related, right? Inya raised her eyebrows. I knew you would say that. There were no brothels, no concubines, and no other places to go. Naturally, there would no longer be any human trafficking. Only then will the world be truly equal. Is that the logic? Lu Xiaoyi had a different opinion. Actually, I feel that true equality is not equal to opening some brothels. Chapter 784. Inya opened her eyes wide. I'm guessing that you'll surely sacrifice yourself for this equality and abandon yourself. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Don't kill everyone with one stroke. If you guys hold this kind of ideal, then you'll never be able to do it. Not everyone is forced. There are also those who are lazy, those who are used to this for a living, and those who purely enjoy it. We have to give everyone with a different attitude a way out. Inya sighed. 1 year, and you're sure it's for your hobby. You actually dare to speak of such a disgusting idea. Lu Xiaoyi shrugged. I can't do anything about it. Young ladies these days aren't easy to deceive. Even if I risk my life, I'll only be able to rub it on my hands and protect myself with qi. I won't even be able to touch the slightest fragrance. Inya was surprised. Oh, cultivators of our generation fight for life and death. For friends, for the sake of loyalty and righteousness, for the sake of belief. Isn't this where the Tao heart lies? Isn't it something we should do? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. If you say it like that, then I'll be sleepy. Xia Bingji had no choice but to interrupt them when she heard the two of them getting further and further off track. Hey, what we need to discuss now is how to survive, all right? One is extremely off base, the other is completely off base. I really regret getting involved with the two of you. After being nervous, what was needed was to relax. If the 15 days of distance between the Golden Hall continent and Red Hill were divided into intervals, then considering the radiation influence of different continents, the actual safe distance only required them to leave Red Hill for 6 to 7 days. If they continued to walk, then the possibility of encountering cultivators from the Golden Hall continent would greatly increase. With the two fairies rallying power and the continent's sense of honor, they would obtain more and more support from Golden Hall continent cultivators, and the Red Earth Trading Company wouldn't dare to pursue them relentlessly. So, the next few days were very crucial. It was also the final time for the Red Earth Trading Company to exert their strength. In the third wave, because there were the figures of the trading company's cultivators, this ratio would become higher and higher, and they still needed to persist for at least 3 more days. The test came one after another. On the 4th day, almost 10 cultivators formed a semicircle and flew in the same direction, surrounding them within it. Walk in a zigzag pattern. Don't blindly go in a straight line. Bingji, pay attention to the back. Don't let anyone get too close. Leave the defensive spells to duck. You need to guard against the body cultivators. Their divine abilities are very troublesome. Leave it to me. Flying in the front was the most stressful because their opponents had to obstruct their advance. It was supposed to be an easy task, but the powerful swordsmen in the 3-man team made it even more difficult to intercept them. Other than long-range spells, long-range attacks from spiritual weapons, spiritual beasts, and barriers, their most effective method was to send a physique cultivator to get close to their opponents. It was extremely dangerous. The swordsman's long-range attack was like a death god's gaze hanging over everyone's heads. They had no choice but to control the distance between each other and defend against the swordsman's attacks. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for any one of them to tank the swordsman's attacks. After a body cultivator took a risk and was killed, the remaining cultivators cautiously distanced themselves. Clearly, they wanted to use some kind of combination attack to achieve their goal. Lu Xiaoyi left behind these words and decisively attacked. I won't be back for 50 breaths of time. You can only rely on yourselves to survive. Work hard, beauties. There is only 1,000 days of being a thief, but not 1,000 days of guarding against thieves. If he gave up the initiative to attack and defend, there would definitely be a loophole after many attempts. As an experienced veteran, he would definitely not allow such a thing to happen. Only by attacking and using the advantage of the sword could he maximize the damage he could inflict on the enemy. He could not act like a cannon like the two women. As for the danger, if the two women had it, so did he. He had to face it alone. He could help them, but he would not be a babysitter who cared about them. His attack immediately disrupted the rhythm of his pursuers. When he used his escape technique, he could use it without any worries. 5 flying swords shot out. This was the first time he had used all his firepower. His body narrowly avoided the bombardment of spells. The 5 elemental sword formation instantly trapped a physique cultivator. It was like a spinning knife with 5 sharp edges, twisting and slashing down. This was a new swordsmanship that he had recently researched, named Flying Guillotine Sword. The name came from a bad taste in ancient times in his previous life. Using such a technique to kill a slightly ordinary physique cultivator was like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. However, the situation now was different. He had to ensure that his first attack was successful. He did not have the time or energy to use a second attack. There were enemies all around him. Some were helping him defend, while others were trying to rescue him. His window of time was very short. He had to strike like a thunderbolt and cause a shock. This was also a psychological battle. Why did he want to kill a physique cultivator? Because this person was from the Chamber of Commerce and was the leader of the group. The 5 flying swords slashed down, and the power of the 5 elemental forces burst forth. The 5 elemental force field formed in a square inch and dispelled the physique cultivator's spell defense. The result was not unexpected. How could an ordinary Jean Dan from the Chamber of Commerce withstand the sure-kill technique of a top-notch swordsman? Once he succeeded, Lu Xiaoyi immediately retreated. It felt as if he was escaping back into the water elemental defense of the cloud-piercing pole. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to defeat them one by one. Even though they knew that this person was difficult to deal with, the remaining physique cultivators were unwilling to give up on this opportunity to tear apart the enemy's defense. Hence, they unleashed their spells. While they were restraining the swordsman, they were also unwilling to let him go. They had underestimated the killing intent of the swordsman. Once a swordsman escaped, how could he retreat after killing one person? At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi's sword fully displayed the characteristics of advancing and retreating freely, pointing to the east and striking to the west. He retreated slightly, then immediately charged forward. The momentum of one person's charge actually made the other 4 people tremble in fear. It was a two-way battle. The brave would live, and the cowardly would die. Out of the 4, 2 chose to continue, while the other 2 spread out to the sides. Lu Xiaoyi's response was to attack the weak side. The sword formation enveloped the physique cultivator, who was flying diagonally to the left. At the same time, the physique cultivator clashed with the physique cultivator in front of him. In the midst of a rain of blood, Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword pierced through the physique cultivator's body once again, leaving the physique cultivator with nowhere to run. The remaining 2 physique cultivators no longer dared to approach. Even if the swordsman retreated again, they were worried that this was a trap. Hence, they could only restrain him from afar. They had already lost their will to fight, and their threat was greatly reduced. This time, Lu Xiaoyi did not feign ignorance. He directly charged towards the 4 physique cultivators who were attacking the 2 girls from behind. When 2 water physique cultivators were defending with all their might, their cultivation was not at a disadvantage, and their spiritual artifacts were at an advantage. What could they do in a short span of 10 breaths? They had already seen the ambush in front of them. When the fiendish swordsman turned around and returned, the 4 physique cultivators at the back all retreated. None of them dared to advance recklessly. The cloud-piercing pole continued to fly, but the physique cultivators did not dare to approach. Their problem was that the range of their spells was not as far as the flying sword. If they wanted to intercept the flying sword, they would have to first enter the sword's range. Everyone knew that in a situation like this, the best way to deal with it was to rush forward together. However, who could be sure that the flying sword would not stab them? Lu Xiaoyi's attack caused the physique cultivators to lose all their confidence. If they could not find a way to deal with this swordsman, the physique cultivators would be a joke. Chapter 785. One Ear. You're really impressive. I think that even if more cultivators come, it won't be enough for you to kill. Why don't you teach me how to use the sword? I feel that I have talent in swordsmanship too. And he took a deep breath. The pressure on the 2 of them was psychological, not physical. Inner sect disciples had a strong foundation, but there was still a gap between them and unorthodox disciples. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Next, it's time for us to see the real deal. Are you ready? Xiao Bingji said calmly. Ear, what method do you think they'll use? Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I don't know, but what I'm most worried about is the appearance of Yuanying cultivators. So I want to ask you, if there's no other choice, what special method do you have to escape? What he asked was every cultivator's final trump card, which would not be easily revealed. It was equivalent to placing one's life in the hands of others, even if it was one's closest kin. But now, Lu Xiaoyi's meaning was very clear. If they had such a method, he would find an opportunity for them to escape. This was not selfless. It was based on an instinctive sense of danger and worry for one's own safety. The only time he could exert his strength to the greatest extent was when he was alone. With these 2 women holding him back, he simply couldn't be completely unrestrained. The reason why sword manipulation was called sword manipulation was because it was like a heavenly steed soaring across the sky, unrestrained and unrestrained. If there was a dot like the cloud-piercing pole, then it wouldn't be a true sword manipulation. He was not a saint. There wouldn't be a heroic plot where he would rather sacrifice himself to protect others. That was the plot of a novel. When danger really came, it was normal for everyone to flee separately. There was nothing shameful about this. This was the truth, human nature, and instinct. So he wanted to know, what kind of trump card did the 2 of them have? He could not risk his life here, but the 2 women had an easier way to escape. Then what was the point of his efforts? It's already reached this stage. I thought they would retreat in the face of difficulties. Inya knew that the bandit was right to plan ahead. It was a rule that Yuanying did not participate in Jindan-level fights, but rules were meant to be broken. In the 9 great sects, this kind of situation was slightly better. However, in the unorthodox sects, Yuanying's use of underhanded methods was not an exception. There were always other ways to deal with this. While they were being chased and intercepted this time, the movements of the Jindan group were precise and swift. It was obvious that there was a powerful existence secretly commanding them. This was why One Ear had said that the worst-case scenario would be Yuanying taking action. Who knew if he would be able to hold back his anger in the end? Xiao Bingji didn't hesitate. I have a space silkworm chrysalis. It was given to me by my master. 2 people would not be disturbed by the outside world. However, this thing also had its limitations. Once it entered the cocoon space, it wouldn't be able to see any changes in the outside world. It would float to wherever it went. Therefore, there was no way to determine where it would land. It could still be in the cloud sea, or it could crash into a continent, or it could float back to Red Hill. Those who enter cannot come out immediately because they don't know if the enemy has left. The maximum time they can last is 3 months. The cocoon space will self-destruct, and overall, the possibility of escaping is still very high. The cocoon space can be used in an instant, so it doesn't require too much preparation. Lu Xiaoyi looked at Enya. Enya was helpless. The patriarch gave me a lotus bridge connected by the bloodline of the Yin family. If I use it, it will create a space passage and bring me back to Yellow Court Mountain. Activating the bridge requires 3 breaths of time to create the space passage. This thing is too heaven-defying for Jin Dan, so it can only be used once. Most importantly, this bridge is connected by the bloodline. In theory, it can only connect the bloodline of the Yin family. However, if I leave, what will happen to you? Lu Xiaoyi smiled wryly. As expected of one of the 9 upper sects, this unique escape technique was indeed miraculous. Perhaps it was because the 2 girls were too outstanding that the sect master gave them this life-saving weapon. This was to prevent any accidents from embarrassing the sect. Of the 2 methods, Enya's Lotus Bridge was the most miraculous. Although it was a one-time use, it could determine the destination and directly return to Yellow Court Mountain. If it wasn't for the fact that only one person could pass through, he would have wanted to hitch a ride. Patriarch Enya was a perfected lord, and a top Yang soul perfected lord at that. It wasn't surprising that she had such a method. Xiao Bingji's cocoon space was slightly worse. It couldn't control the direction of the destination, and could only rely on luck. However, the upper realm of Zhou Xian was so big. If it really floated for 3 months, how unlucky would it be to float back to Red Hill? Zhou Xian had 3,000 continents and an endless sea of clouds. In terms of probability, it should be possible to escape safely. Moreover, it could bring 2 people and could be used instantly. Get ready. I know you don't want to go alone, so I promise you. If it's just these Jin, Dan, good-for-nothings, no matter how many there are, I won't force you to leave. However, if there's Yuanying, I won't be able to help you in battle. If anything happens to you, it will also affect my mood. Therefore, you should leave. This is also a help to me. I hope that there will be a day when we meet again. However, the prerequisite is that each of us make a rational decision and not just based on impulse. Enya was dissatisfied. One ear. Where's your trump card? You can't keep it to yourself when we've already told you. That's not fair. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. The swordsman's trump card is only the sword. It's my trump card, my one and only. The Jin Dan from Red Hill surrounded him from afar, but they were no longer willing to take the sword. They knew very well that the swordsman's strength was not something they could resist. With the nature of the Chamber of Commerce, it was impossible for there to be a cultivator who took the initiative to use death to create opportunities for his companions. If you did that, others would only laugh at you for being stupid. This was the difference between having a Taoist tradition and being a straggler. The cloud piercer flew through the sea of clouds, accompanied by a dozen or so Jin Dan. They didn't move forward to attack or obstruct him, but they also didn't move away. It was as if they were waiting for something. This strange situation continued for more than a day. From the time they left Red Hill until now, 5 days had already passed. It was time to see the results. In the distance, there was a fluctuation of spiritual opportunity. Its speed was astonishing. Lu Xiaoyi recognized it and guessed what it was. It's the Cloud Sea speedboat. They want to use the speedboat to scatter us, and then destroy them one by one. The Cloud Sea speedboat was a flying weapon in the sea of clouds. Its speed was much faster than Enya's cloud piercer. However, this thing couldn't be stored in a storage ring, so the 3 of them couldn't carry it with them. Because it was much larger than a flying spirit tool, its structure was abnormally sturdy, and it had the support of a spell formation. Even a flying sword as strong as Lu Xiaoyi couldn't destroy it in one strike. With such a fast boat, if it was controlled well, it could completely disperse the 3 of them. Even if they couldn't scatter, the Jin Dan could use the speedboat as a cover to close in. It could also bring about endless variables. There were also experts in the Chamber of Commerce. Chapter 786. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi look over, Enya shook her head resolutely. One ear, you said before that if we don't have Yuanying, we'll go in together. Although I can't be of much help, my spirit artifacts can still be useful in battle. I'm not trash. Since we came together, we have to leave together. We have to be reunited. He looked at Xia Bingji again. She did not avoid his gaze and looked straight at him. Just this action showed her intentions. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Do you know that after you run away, I don't have to work so hard to be a hero anymore? Actually, I also want to run away. Inya giggled. It's all our fault. You're not yourself anymore. Aren't women very troublesome? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Poor heroes. How many of them can't help themselves? Face kills people. Xia Bingji was very serious. But there aren't many who can hold on to their face until now. Even thieves have morals. You really did it. Lu Xiaoyi frowned. I beg you, don't praise me anymore, okay? If you do, I'll really die. Xia Bingji was very calm. That's right. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi's face turned cold. Seize the boat. Xia Bingji did not hesitate. She had been with this great thief for a long time and had been infected by his boldness and daring. I have the weak water goblet. This enchantment can slow down the speed and agility of the boat. But the boat is too big. I don't think it can hold on for long. It should be within 10 breaths. Inya was also very excited. Seizing a boat, just thinking about it was very exciting. I have a purple lotus core. It can create an absolute defense for 10 breaths. You only have 10 breaths. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. One is moving firewood, the other is starting a fire. Are they trying to roast me alive? Fine, 10 breaths it is. But who knows how to drive a boat? Xia Bingji smiled. Don't worry about that. Both Aya and I can do it. As the three of them chatted and laughed, they came to a decision. The spiritual fluctuations in the distance grew stronger and stronger, accompanied by the eagerness of the surrounding Jindan. They had been messed around by the three of them for a few days. The swordsman's invincible attacks, the Kuan cultivator's fancy refurbishment of his spiritual artifact defense, and the Kuan cultivator's timely inspection and repair of flaws. This made it so that they had nowhere to bite, and they had lost more than 10 of their brothers. Now that the swift boat had collided repeatedly, it would inevitably cause unpredictable changes. As long as the three of them worked together, they would be able to split the spoils and reap the spoils. The only problem was who would deal with the swordsman. When the swift boat appeared in their line of sight, time began to count in breaths of time. Inya put away the cloud-piercing pole. Right now, it wasn't suitable for the three of them to ride on a single air transportation spirit artifact. It would be too easy for them to be targeted and collided with. Only by using their own escape techniques would they be able to dodge. The swift boat slightly adjusted its direction and suddenly accelerated, crashing into the space where the three of them were. A few cultivators were sneakily following behind it. In everyone's common sense, the best way to deal with such a collision was to dodge in advance. Otherwise, the shockwave brought about by the swift boat, which was more than 10 zhang in size, could easily affect the cultivators' escape techniques. The three of them were like birds startled by the twang of a bow, narrowly avoiding the swift boat. The most dangerous one was Lu Xiaoyi, who brushed past the boat and shot out his flying sword at the same time. A few cultivators who wanted to take advantage of the situation were shocked and quickly dodged, but none of them dared to fight. Only the unlucky one with the slowest reaction was turned into a vengeful spirit by the flying sword. This was a necessary prerequisite. It was to prevent the Jindan from approaching with the swift boat so that they could win a few precious breaths of time. Sure enough, when the swift boat turned around and collided with them again, no Jindan dared to follow. Everyone was watching from afar to see what would happen next. The three of them had a tacit understanding. Xia Bingji seemed to be dodging in a panic, but at the same time, she raised her jade hand and cast the weak water enchantment. This was her strongest enchantment. It was the combination of her own strength and her water attribute treasure. When she was in the weak water enchantment, the power of her water attribute spells could be maximized, and there were many other wonderful uses. However, since it was to delay the swift boat, it could only be used in the weak water enchantment. The speed of the swift boat suddenly decreased. Its flexibility was also greatly affected. Lu Xiaoyi's body flickered, and he was already close to the swift boat. At this time, the onlooking Jindan group were not stupid. They immediately realized their intentions. If they seized the swift boat, What else could they do? They all rushed forward, and countless spells came at them. However, Inya's reaction was faster than them. She stood behind Lu Xiaoyi and stood side by side with Xia Bingji. She crushed the purple lotus heart in her hand, and an invisible force spread out with the three of them as the center. All the spells, talismans, spiritual weapons, magical powers, and demonic beasts were unable to move an inch in front of this invisible force. They disappeared without a trace like clay oxen entering the sea. The swift boat in the sea of clouds had a tiger's head, a leopard's tail, and a bear's waist. It was not referring to its shape, but its solid structure. There was almost no weakness. The only weakness was the back of the neck, where the cargo was loaded and unloaded. The swift boat was not specially used for collision. Its main function was to smuggle and transport goods in the sea of clouds, so it must have a large enough cargo hatch for entry and exit. It was also the weakest part of the entire swift boat. He turned his hand, and a spirit-absorbing pearl appeared in his hand. He pressed it on the swift boat, and suddenly all the spiritual power in the defensive array of the swift boat seemed to have found a vent. It began to madly pour into the spirit-absorbing pearl, which was equivalent to temporarily destroying the defensive array of the swift boat. When the spiritual power in the spirit-absorbing pearl was full, it would return to normal. Of course, this did not belong to him, but to Inya, who had countless treasures in her collection. As long as there was a need, she would definitely be able to take out a suitable item. Once the array lost its function, how could it withstand the cutting of the flying sword? His 5-element sword plates were all refined with the best materials in the cultivation world, and they were extremely sharp. With just a few cuts, the cargo hatch had been removed. Only 5 seconds had passed. As soon as the door was opened, a cold feeling penetrated his body. It was an intuition of danger from the depths of his soul. There was no doubt about it. Lu Xiaoyi shouted, "One duck! Sister Xia!" The two women looked sad and a little reluctant. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword drilled into the boat, and he shouted again, "It's time to fulfill your promise." Inya's eyes were filled with tears. She knew why one ear blocked the hatch and did not move. It was to buy time for them. If they did not make a decision, it was tantamount to putting him in the most dangerous situation. What did it mean for a swordsman to block the narrow hatch? It meant that half of his strength was gone. A small bridge appeared on Inya's forehead, and it rapidly expanded. In the span of a few breaths, it had already stretched out into an endless distance. Her body also started to become blurry as she was reluctant to part with it, and only a few drops of tears fell down sadly. At the same time, Xia Bingji, who was beside her, suddenly disappeared, as if she had used the invisibility technique. Chapter 787. P.S. Asking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword had already hit something in the speedboat, but it was as if it had struck a piece of leather. He had to block the entrance to buy time for the two women. He really wanted to run because this was an abnormal battle. There were all kinds of hidden factors that could lead to failure. The route was fixed, the difference in numbers, the two burdens, the difference in realms. There were many mistakes, but he could not correct them, starting from when the two women took off from Redmount. Tactical correctness could never replace strategic failure. But he was depressed to find that the more he wanted to run, the more the situation prevented him from doing so. There was a yuanying in the speedboat, and it was not an ordinary yuanying. It was completely different from the two yuanying bandits in Taixin, Zhonghuang, and Zhonghuang. This was a nascent soul stage cultivator who had truly entered the nascent soul stage with overwhelming advantages. He did not know who it was, but from the fact that this yuanying had been hiding in the speedboat, he could infer his identity. It was very intriguing. He did not want anyone to see him. Maybe it was because of the special arrangement in the speedboat that this yuanying was not detected by the other cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know what kind of method this nascent soul would use to attack them, but at least he knew that he couldn't hide. He could not hide, not only because the two women behind him needed time to break away. It was also because a swordsman could not leave his back to his opponent. The speedboat was only a few dozen feet long, and it was almost within reach. Under the Yuanying's attack, where could he escape? There was no escape. The wrong plan to seize the speedboat had put him in a desperate situation. He had been guarding against the Yuanying's arrival, but he did not expect it to be in this way. If he could not escape, then he could only charge. This was the swordsman's way of fighting. Inya's departure had caused him to lose his absolute defense. In fact, if he did not leave, the window of absolute defense was over, and it was meaningless. Behind him, dozens of Jin Dan's attacks mercilessly hit his back. Other than the activation of the 5 elements, he did not do anything to defend himself. This was because he needed to unleash all his power on Yuanying. Now, he was finally the only one left. The 2 burdens that he had mentioned were no longer burdens, but they were not as carefree as he had imagined. He was forced to this place, and the only path left was Mount Hua. It was a dead end. Lu Xiaoyi still wanted to give it a try. As for what would happen after that, he was no longer thinking about how to deal with the dozen or so hyenas behind him who saw an opportunity. The 5 elements sword formation shone brightly. His painstaking efforts to incorporate the flying sword into his secret had finally paid off. Even though he was so close to the powerful Yuanying, he was still not afraid to use his sword. The brilliance converged and condensed into a sword. With a murderous aura, Zhu Qing shot forward with the power of the sword array. At the same time, the Big Dipper sword plate came out of his dantian, and over 1,000 sword lights shot out like rain. He drew his sword with his right hand. This was already the strongest attack he could make in an instant. Swordsmanship that was too complicated and fancy in such a narrow space was completely meaningless in front of such an opponent. It was a head-on confrontation. In the depths of the fast boat, an illusory figure snorted. The way a fugitive behaved was completely different from the graceful bearing of a disciple of an upper sect. Unfortunately, he could not use 2 direct methods to deal with this guy. At his level, he knew that everything could be reversed, as long as there was karma involved. He had been entrusted to preside over this encirclement. He had thought that he was just a distant dispatcher, and that all the karma would be borne by the individual Jin Dan. It had nothing to do with him. But these individual Jin Dan were really too useless. Dozens of people had surrounded 3 people, but they could not stop them at all. They even lost more than 10 lives. The purpose of the fast boat was to break up the joint attack of the 3 of them. He was not really going to kill them. It was not something that a nascent soul stage cultivator like him should do. Although the treasures promised by the Chamber of Commerce were priceless, they were not worth mentioning compared to the future of his cultivation. But he had never thought that these 3 people would be so daring. They actually dared to seize the boat in the air. This forced him into an awkward situation. If he made a move, if there really was a great cultivator who wanted to reverse the situation, he and the upper sect he belonged to would not be able to avoid becoming enemies with the Huangting Taoism. It was not worth it. If he did not make a move, could it be that he, a great upper sect Yuanying, would be scared away by 3 little Jin Dan like this? Fortunately, these 3 Jin Dan's perception was very good. The moment the cargo door opened, they understood his existence and immediately chose to retreat through space. Of course, he had the ability to destroy their level of spatial separation. No matter whose artifact it was, the difference between the user and the user could not be erased. Once the Lotus Bridge was erected, he immediately dismissed the idea of making a move. This was because this thing came from a true monarch, and a high-level true monarch at that. It was connected through the power of the bloodline. 3 breaths of time was a bit long for a true monarch, and it could be made shorter. But this true monarch's intention was very clear. He wanted to use 3 breaths of time to tell others that this was his clan's cultivator. If they dared to make a move, they had to consider the consequences. He did not dare to make a move. Just like how these Jin Dan were not worth mentioning in front of him, he was also like an ant in front of a high-level true monarch. Next was the other girl. Her escape method was weaker, and he could also break it immediately. However, it was because he was too familiar with this escape method. He was so familiar that not only did he understand the function of this cocoon space, he also knew the origin of this thing. And he also knew the crazy old witch who made this thing. She was the most ruthless and unreasonable old witch among the nascent soul cultivators in the immortal of Zhou upper realm. Even if she was unreasonable, she would still stir things up. He would rather go against a reasonable perfected lord than face this crazy old woman. Since she was her disciple, there was no other way. He could only watch her leave safely. What a headache. He could not let go of the last one. Otherwise, he would not be able to accept the gift from the Chamber of Commerce with a clear conscience. He would also lose face. This sword cultivator's face was unfamiliar, and he didn't have much of a background. He was a good target. However, he was also the most powerful among the three of them. He was the key to why they were able to make it all the way here. The power of his sword was something that even a peak nascent soul cultivator like him had to take seriously. He didn't dare be careless. With such a strong sword ability, his background could not be too low. This small team of three was basically made up of all kinds of rich people. He decided that it was better not to make a move himself. The safest way was to push the blame to the Jean Dan group outside and push the blame to the Chamber of Commerce. He reluctantly took out a pearl. This was a strange item that he obtained during his travels in the other world, the soul separation pearl. Its function was very simple. It could push a cultivator's memory back to before they started cultivating. In this way, the swordsman would not know how to use his skills, even though he had a body full of skills. A mortal's memory would not even be clear about their meridians, so how could they use their body's treasures? It would only slowly return to normal after more than a year. It was equivalent to letting a person relive their childhood memories. There was a benefit to this method. It would not be affected by karma. As for this swordsman, how could he wait for more than a year? With those red-eyed Jean Dan individuals, he would not even last for 10 breaths. Chapter 788. Lu Xiaoyi pulled out his sword and was about to charge forward, even if the flying swords did not achieve their goal. He had no other choice. The flying swords might not have achieved anything, but at least they could attract the opponent's attention to defend. That was enough. But at this moment, a hand reached out from beside him. It was as white as snow, tightly grabbing his belt. Hanging a small jade silkworm on it, it pulled him back. At the same time, a bead exploded between them. It was colorless, odorless, and undetectable. "Come in," Xia Bingji ordered. Lu Xiaoyi did not struggle. He pretended to be a hero and said, "Don't pull me. I'll fight it out with him." Xia Bingji laughed, still pretending. He was trying to save face. The two of them entered nameless and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. The person on the boat's side. He really did not have a chance to attack this time, because the power of the swordsman's sword was too strong. It was so strong that it was beyond Jean Dan's level. Ju City spun around in the air because it suddenly could not feel its master's breath. This was a situation that had never happened since it became a spirit. It knew that its master was still alive, but it did not know where he went. Yuaning took out a jade box and released his spiritual sense. He knew how strong a sword spirit was, so he could not use force. "Come, I'll help you find your master within 50 years. This was a very suffocating space. It was really like a cocoon. The two of them could not turn around, and their bodies would touch from time to time. Lu Xiaoyi was very satisfied. This space is not bad. It's small enough. I like it. Xia Bingji moved her body, but she could not change the firmness of the space wall. She said angrily, "Stay away from me. Where did you put your hand?" Lu Xiaoyi was very wronged. "You can't blame me. I can't stand properly. In the last few breaths of time, all of those bastards' spells hit me." Xia Bingji had no choice but to support him. She could feel that his breathing was chaotic and uncoordinated. She knew that he was telling the truth. In the end, after Enya left, he did not have the absolute defense. In those few breaths of time, he had taken all the damage from the spells on his own. Even in the short period of time when she went out, she also took a few hits, but they were not as heavy as his. "Are you dead? Don't you know how to recuperate yourself?" Are you pretending to be pitiful to take advantage of me? Of course. She couldn't be at ease when she appeared again. The chrysalis space was rather crude. Although it was said to be a two-person space, it required a cultivator to enter it and expand it. She didn't mention it before because she was afraid that everyone would be worried. Moreover, she could take this opportunity to come out and see what happened to this great thief. If he was still alive, she could drag him in. They were the ones who had caused this assassination attempt. She couldn't leave her ears behind to take the blame after the main culprit had escaped. This wasn't her style. Quiet people were always more persistent and had a bottom line. Otherwise, it would be shameful if the dignified fairy Xia of the Yellow Court Palace did something worse than a great thief. She had already made up her mind. After Enya left, she would come out and take a look. It would be best if she could drag this ear in. If it didn't work, she would use her own life to protect him. She, Fairy Xia, had never owed anyone a favor in her life. No one would. I'm trying my best. Maybe I was shocked by the spells. My mind is a little muddled. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. He didn't feel dizzy. Why was it that when he tried to control the secret, it was always a little obscure and didn't listen to him? Also, he seemed to be a little muddled. Has Aya left? In order to cover up her embarrassment, Xia Bingji changed the topic. Aya? Who is that? Oh, she has left. Lu Xiaoyi felt a little unfamiliar, but also a little familiar. Why did she think of other people at such a dangerous time? I was just asking. Irrelevant people. Xia Bingji also felt strange why she brought up this topic. Also, why were the two of them here? I seem to have forgotten something. Xia Bingji suddenly realized. What was the reason? Was she framed? Who framed her? We can go in and out freely, right? I'm a little dizzy, my body is not listening to me. Lu Xiaoyi also felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong. Why did he have to squeeze himself in such a space with such a charming beauty? Although he didn't reject it, it was a little strange. Yes, but I seem to have forgotten how to get out. Who are you? Why are you here? Xia Bingji looked at this man suspiciously. He was a little strange, but also a little familiar. I am. Then who are you? Could it be that an old witch from the Demon Mountain came down the mountain to find a handsome young man? Let me tell you, I am firmly against it. And you can only do it once a night. My body can't take it anymore. Me? You lecher. Are you making a false countercharge and slandering me? Xia Bingji felt that a lot of her memory was being lost. It was as if a dam was opened. Then, because of the loss of a lot of memory, she was deceived and fainted. Don't act pitiful. Do you think I will let my guard down? Where's this place? How did I get here? Lu Xiaoyi subconsciously hugged the soft body of the beauty in front of him. Although his mouth was honorable, his body was instinctively honest. His spirit was far stronger than a woman's, so he could hold on longer. Memories were being lost. This experience was the opposite of when he transmigrated. It felt even worse. He desperately tried to remember. From the reason why he came here to his identity and origin, everything that could let him know who he was. I'm a disciple of Xin Yuan. My name is One Ear. I think some people call me One Ear. I'm also a great thief. But why am I a great thief? What did I steal? I am Fei Chai. No, I'm actually Lu Xiaoyi. My Taoist name is Cigarette, but I am from the Fifth Ring, or Qing Kong. I'm here to be a spy. You can't forget this. I am Lu Xiaoyi. I am from a low-level cultivation planet. What's my name again? I am a young master of Lu Province. Mother is gone. Lu Xiaoyi's vision turned black. He completely fell into confusion. The two of them became a pile and softened together. The chrysalis space floated in another dimension. Due to various random reasons, it changed directions. This was an unstable space between the main world and the anti-world. It was not that Xia Bingji's master was brilliant, but that she could only do so much. Other than not being able to fly out of the upper realm of Zhou Xian, everywhere else was free. The operation of the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce was deliberately suppressed by someone, so it did not spread. Enya successfully returned to Huangting Mountain and immediately gathered people to search the Cloud Sea. She forced her way into the red earth basin and caused chaos. However, she could not do anything for now because Xia Bingji's lantern was still bright. She had already sent people to the carefree continent to inquire about One Ear's lantern. If it was extinguished, she did not mind causing a storm of blood in Red Hill, even if it was for a great thief. Chapter 789. A few months later, the cocoon space was shaking and the space's restraints were getting weaker and weaker. However, because the structure was still there and the person inside was unconscious, it was barely holding on. Until the cocoon space was attracted by the gravitational force of a small piece of land. After being caught by the gravitational force, it was unable to break free and crashed into it, disappearing into nothingness. This kind of situation had happened a few times in the past few months. However, the previous few times, the space barrier was strong and did not break. This time, however, the situation was different. Little Bowsy climbed out of the Lu River with nimble movements. Behind his waist was a fish basket filled with his harvest from this trip. Half a basket of turtles and shrimps. Although he was only 12 years old, the pressure of life had taught him to face it. Every day, he would go fishing in the river to supplement his family's income. Lu River was a small river in his hometown. It was calm and peaceful. Other than the rainy season, there was basically no danger. Many villagers relied on it for food and survival. As a 12-year-old child, because of the early exposure to the pressure of life, he appeared to be mature. At least, compared to other children of the same age, this was the case. His body was a little thin and was still growing. However, he was already a qualified fisherman. His swimming ability was also praised by the people around him. Today's harvest was average, but it was not much. Fishing also depended on the season. Fish had their own habits. After reaching the shore, he quickly dried his body and found his own clothes to wear. This season was already a little cold. He could not afford to fall sick. No one would steal his tattered clothes. Fishing in this season of the year, one could imagine his living conditions. He picked up the fish basket and weighed it in his hand. He was a little disappointed. Before he set foot on the road home, he unwillingly looked at the surface of the river. Originally, he subconsciously glanced at it, but a small black dot on the surface of the river caught his attention. To a native of Lu River, every mountain, every blade of grass, and every tree had long been deeply engraved in his heart. No matter what was added or missing, he would immediately feel it. There should not be river stones there. Since there was a black dot, there must be something floating there. His eyesight had always been good. On a clear day, he could easily see 8 to 10 li. Then what was it? Could it be an alligator? There were very few alligators in the Liuhe River. Although they were gentle and rarely took the initiative to hurt people, they were still beasts. They were not fish or shrimp, and there were precedents of humans being attacked by them. Although he was still young, Little Bun was very responsible. He decided to go and see what was going on. If there was indeed an alligator in the waters, they would have to inform the elders of the village as a precaution. The current of the Lu River was slow, and he estimated that it would take some time for that thing to reach here. He was an impatient person, and he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to see clearly when it was late, so he decided to run along the shore. The closer he got, the more he felt that it wasn't an alligator. It didn't have a robust body at all. Instead, it was more like a drowning person. No, it wasn't just one person, but two people. Two people who were hugging each other tightly even after death. Although he already had the ability to survive independently, he didn't dare to act on his own. He also didn't have the guts to dive into the water to fish. That wasn't a fish or a turtle, but a dead person. With a human life at stake, Little Bowsy threw down the fish basket and ran back to the village. Disaster. It was a disaster. There are 2 floating corpses in the Liuhe River. Shaodi village was the same as the countless scattered villages on both sides of the Liuhe River. It was isolated, poor, and simple. Most of them had never strayed too far from here. They farmed, fished, and raised livestock. Their lives weren't easy, but they also enjoyed themselves. The village was managed by the elders of the village. In fact, it was the same thing. The elders of the big families in the village were responsible for all the complicated matters. There was no system and no management. Fortunately, there were only 100 or so families, so it didn't matter. After receiving Little Bowsy's report, the 10 or so youths in the village rushed out. Under Little Bowsy's guidance, they ran towards the Lioha River. Human lives were important. If they didn't report what they knew, and if they didn't save people in the area, they would be investigated by the elders of the county. Luckily, the Lioha River wasn't very fast. When they arrived, the 2 corpses were still floating on the water. The youths were obviously not as timid as Little Bowsy. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, 4 or 5 of them immediately took off their clothes and swam forward. The villagers on both sides of the Lioha River were all good swimmers. Some pulled their clothes, some pulled their legs, and some pushed them from the back. Without much effort, the 2 corpses were pulled ashore. What made them feel strange was that although the 2 corpses were dead, their joints weren't stiff. Their faces were lifelike, and their skin was elastic. Furthermore, their bodies were dead. It was a young man and a young woman. The young man had a handsome face, and the young woman looked like a fairy that had descended from the heavens. The young man hugged the young woman tightly in his arms. The youths wanted to separate the 2, but they couldn't. Their hands were like iron pliers, and no one could pry them apart. All kinds of strange phenomena occurred. After a while, the sky had completely darkened. The group of people's hearts were beating like drums. In a remote area, there were all kinds of superstitions. Mountain spirits, water monsters, humans, and demons immediately floated into their minds. Are these 2 people dead or alive? Are they humans or demons? It's so dark, it's so scary. A burly man was extremely uneasy in such a strange situation. Why don't we leave him here first and talk about it tomorrow? Another villager said with a trembling voice. After some discussion, they decided to make a simple stretcher and carry the 2 corpses all the way back to the village. The people who came were all young and strong. So how heavy could the 2 corpses be when they were carried by 2 young people? It should have been an easy task, but along the way, there were several groups of people. This wasn't a weight that people of their size should have. Even if they were the richest landlord in the village, 2 corpses wouldn't be so heavy when piled together. The more the villagers carried them, the more shocked and scared they became. They knew that this could be the legendary ghost pressure. But the rumors also said that if mortals didn't carry them, it wouldn't matter. But as long as they carried them, they couldn't put them down halfway until they reached their destination. Along the way, every step was filled with fear. Cold sweat flowed down their backs. They were afraid that the 2 corpses would explode and harm the big guy again. Their hearts were filled with fear and anger. They looked at Little Bun, who had discovered the corpses, with an unfriendly gaze. Little Bun felt wronged. I don't know either, but at that time, they were indeed floating on the surface of the water. All the uncles saw it with their own eyes. Who knew that they were so heavy? Can stones also float? He didn't mean it when he said this, but the listeners were terrified. That's right. How did such heavy people float on the surface of the water? No one was in the mood to complain about Little Bun anymore. They just wanted to send him back to the village as soon as possible. They didn't care what others did to him. They still had to go back to burn incense and worship the gods, hoping that bad luck wouldn't befall them. Chapter 790. Finally, they were carried back to the river deity temple beside the village. After everyone explained the situation, they immediately dispersed. No one was willing to stay for long, so this problem was left to the village elder. Elder Sue was even more superstitious, and he was also regretting in his heart. He regretted sending people to the river to fish up the corpse. Wouldn't it be better to pretend that he didn't know? After thinking about it, he sent people to the neighboring village to invite the witch over. As for the 2 people in the river deity temple, who would dare to care about their lives in the dark? Only one person, Little Bun. He was the first person to discover them, and he even received a few slaps from his irritable father when he returned home. He was the only one who didn't want the 2 to die, because if that happened, the village would treat him as an inauspicious person, and he would be ostracized, despised, and suppressed. In such a small place, if the living environment became bad, how would he survive in the future? He didn't have anything else, so he could only roast the prawns in his fish basket and secretly send them to the river deity temple. He put them down and ran away. No matter how brave he was still a child. The next day, late in the morning, Elder Sue brought the witch and dozens of strong villagers, each holding a stick to boost their courage. Behind them, there were even more villagers who came to watch the show. They couldn't be chased away. They were all relatives, so they couldn't control them. The more people there were, the more courage there would be. A large group of people came to the river deity temple, only to see that the young man and woman were still hugging each other, leaning against the river beast statue in front of the river deity temple. Their posture hadn't changed at all. Elder Sue finally felt a little relieved. To be able to stay beside the river beast for an entire night without being eaten, they probably weren't some kind of monster, right? There were also some roasted prawns on the side, which were sent by a kind-hearted person last night. There was nothing strange about it. The witch was brave after all. She ate this bowl of rice, so she had to be brave. After a round of pretending to be mysterious, the river deity jumped up and walked in front of the two people. She splashed dog blood and stuck talismans on them, but there was no movement. When they weren't paying attention, she poked and prodded their bodies with her fingers. The witch's basic skills were half a local doctor. She didn't dare to say that it was too profound, but she knew some basic pharmacology and human body changes. After poking and prodding, she immediately knew that the two people weren't completely dead. Their skin was soft and still warm. As long as he was alive, things would be easier. In fact, the witch was also afraid of the dead. If she did too many of these things, she would inevitably be punished by the heavens. He continued to dance, but ordered the elders who were watching to prepare a few bowls of hot rice soup. He observed the two people's facial features closely and was secretly amazed. Their complexion, appearance, skin, and dress showed that they came from a big place. Even in the countryside, you wouldn't see such beautiful people, especially the girl. She was like a person from a painting. With that thought in mind, she became a lot more serious. Naturally, she changed her identity from a witch to a local doctor. They must be nobles from the prefectural prefecture. He didn't know how they fell into the water. If he could wake them up, he would only need to relax a little, and he would be able to perform 100 rituals. He wouldn't have to worry about anything. Not long after, he got half a bucket of rice soup from some busybody's kitchen. It was obviously for lunch. Now that he was here to watch the show, he didn't care. People in the countryside didn't have much entertainment. It was rare to see someone like him, so of course he had to feast his eyes. The witch scooped out half a bowl of rice soup from a broken pottery bowl and carefully brought it to the young man's mouth. He was a man, after all. His body was definitely stronger, so it would be easier for him to recover. He pinched open his mouth and poured a mouthful of rice soup. He patted his chest with his palm and poured another mouthful. His movements were very skillful. It was obvious that he had done it before. It was an effective way to save a drowning person. After the third gulp, the young man's throat moved and he began to breathe. He quickly returned to normal. This process surprised the healer beside him. She had also saved people before, but she had never seen anyone recover so quickly. The young man opened his eyes and looked at everything in front of him in a daze. The old woman with messy makeup on her face, the strange, beautiful girl in his arms, and the hundreds of pairs of eyes not far away. Where am I? Did I drink too much at Chow Foam Brothel? He closed his eyes again and carefully thought about what had happened. It seemed like he had just come out of Chow Foam Brothel. However, he remembered very clearly that he did not ask any singers to come out. With his mother and Aunt Kai around, he did not dare to do so. Moreover, this woman was definitely not a singer. The difference in temperament was like the difference between clouds and mud. It was the difference between elegance and vulgarity. The girl in his arms was sleeping peacefully. Her eyebrows were light, and there was a kind of amazing, peerless elegance. She was someone who would never appear in Chow Foam Brothel. Young man, let go. Your wife is yours. No one can take her away from you. However, I have to feed her some rice soup now. It's very inconvenient for you to hug her like this. Lu Xiaoyi awkwardly let go of his hands. The young master of Lu Province was hugging a girl with an anxious expression in front of everyone. This was very lacking in the upbringing of a big family. However, where was his place? The witch at the side continued to feed him rice soup. Lu Xiaoyi, on the other hand, was quickly calculating in his heart. This should not be Pooh City. It did not have a unique atmosphere of a Gobi city. Could it be in the south? But why did he come to the south? There was no such arrangement. He was just a transmigrator who had been in this cultivation world for less than a year. He was still hanging out with little Chi and slowly exploring the truth of this cultivation world. Could it be that after he left Chow Phone Brothel, he was hit with a brick and transmigrated into another person's body? Old lady, do you have a mirror in your hand? The witch took out a bronze mirror from her bosom. This was one of the things she relied on for a living. Of course, she had to carry it with her. Lu Xiaoyi took the bronze mirror. At least he understood one thing. He was still him. He was still the young master of Lu Province, Lu Xiaoyi. He was still the same person, but the place was different. From the moment he left Chow Phone Brothel until now, he seemed to have lost a part of his memory. His clothes were also wrong. He was originally dressed like a scholar. How did he become a Taoist? Moreover, his hands were full of rings. He was a low-key person. Lu Province was also a low-key family. How could his mother tolerate him acting like a nouveau riche? Wait, there were also rings on his toes and head. What was going on? The rings were not made of gold, stone, or wood. He did not know what they were made of, but they felt very mysterious. He could not figure it out at the moment. He would think about it later. He turned his back and separated himself from the hundreds of curious eyes not far away. His left hand reached under his crotch without a trace. Fortunately, it was still there. However, why did it feel like it had grown a lot? As a man, he was very concerned about this kind of thing. He did not reject this change, but the problem was that it came too suddenly. He touched his long hair again. No, his hair had also grown a lot. Then he realized that he had probably lost his memory for a period of time. Chapter 791. Lu Xiaoyi didn't have much time to think about his question because an old man carefully walked towards him from the crowd. At the same time, the girl that he had been hugging woke up. From the confusion in her eyes, it was clear that she was like him, extremely confused about her current situation. He wanted to know everything about himself from her. Obviously, she had the same idea, but the current situation didn't allow it. The old man asked carefully and stood about 10 feet away, as if he was guarding against something. Young master, where did you come from? Did you float on the river? Did you meet with some disaster? Do you need me to help you report this to the authorities? Lu Xiaoyi covered his head. Although everything happened so suddenly, he was very clear-headed. Now wasn't the time to reveal everything. He needed to have a basic understanding of the current situation before he could decide what to say and what to do. I came from the prefecture. My head hurts a little. Sir, can you let me rest for a while? There are a lot of things and my mind is in a mess. Old Su nodded. And he could speak human language and was polite, so he probably wasn't a monster. He wasn't an unreasonable person. No matter who it was, after soaking in the water for so long and being exposed to the wind for an entire night in the river god's temple, their body would have problems. It was normal for them to rest for a few days. That's good too. Taking care of your body is the most important thing. Even if you're young, you can't ruin your body like this. How about this? I'll arrange for you to stay in a nearby village. It'll be easier to take care of you. What do the two of you think? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. He didn't seem to have any other ideas for the time being, and the girl beside him was the same. Lu Xiaoyi and Xia Bingji were brought to their respective villagers' homes and began their ignorant search. Not every family was willing to accept them because there were still many doubts that couldn't be explained. What if they woke up in the middle of the night and ate people in the middle of the night? In the end, Lu Xiaoyi was arranged to stay in Little Bun's house. This was his punishment for causing trouble. Xia Bingji's situation was much better because the villagers had never seen such a beautiful fairy-like person before. How would you be a monster? At most, she would be a pitiful woman who had been snatched away by demons. After resting for a few days, Lu Xiaoyi knew that there was nothing wrong with him at all. His body couldn't be any better. The injuries he suffered in the sea of clouds had been automatically healed by his body over the past few months. What he had to do every day was to talk to the villagers and understand this strange place. He finally understood that this place was indeed not Pooh City. This world was not even his original world. He realized that he had inexplicably arrived at a brand new place. This place did not even have his own name. 3 days later, he pretended to have recovered and went out for a walk. He met Xia Bingji, who was also out for a walk. The two of them stared at each other and didn't know what was going on. Arriving at the small pond behind the village, Lu Xiaoyi asked hopefully, "Can you remember anything about everything between us? Where did they come from? What happened? Why are you here?" Xia Bingji's eyes are blurred. She shakes her head and sobs. "I don't remember anything. It happened after I turned 15. I don't even know how old I am now." Lu Xiaoyi is an open-minded person. He has already transmigrated once, so he doesn't mind transmigrating again. He is very experienced in this aspect. Then, let me introduce myself. I am Lu Xiaoyi. I was born in the Sima residence of the 3 stars illuminating Yi Kingdom. I have admired Tao since I was young and yearned for it. My memory stops at the age of 19. Xia Bingji's eyes are filled with shyness. Although her body is that of an old witch, her spirit is still that of a 16-year-old girl. My name is Xia Bingji. I come from the Yellow Court continent. My memory stops at the age of about 15 this year. No, it stops at the age of 15. Both of them are very smart people. Their memories are wiped, but their intelligence is not. Their memories before the age of 10, and according to the changes in their body development, what should be big is big. What should be long? What should be long? What should be long? What should be long? Lu Xiaoyi smiles. Very good. At least now we have found something in common, and that is that we both like Tao cultivation. If my guess is correct, it is because of Tao cultivation that we ended up together. You don't have any objections, right? Xia Bingji thinks for a while and nods in agreement. It should be so. Could it be that we accidentally entered the same space tunnel? I seem to have heard of it before. Or we were plotted against. What is the 3 stars? Is it also in the Zhou Xian upper realm? Lu Xiaoyi smiles bitterly. I don't know. I haven't sensed Qi yet, so I know nothing about Tao cultivation. But there is one thing. We are very likely to be martial siblings or Tao companions. Xia Bingji blushes. It is only a possibility, not necessarily. Lu Xiaoyi says seriously, "It is not that I want to take advantage of you, Sister Bingji. You and I have fallen to this point. Fortunately, our bodies are fine, but we do not know where our bodies are and where our fate lies. In order to find out the truth as soon as possible, both of us should tell each other everything we know. Do not misjudge our judgment because of some worldly things." Xia Bingji shyly lowers her head. "Senior brother is right, I understand. It is just that we were originally strangers, but we suddenly became like this. I can't accept it for a while." Lu Xiaoyi says patiently, "You should have heard from the villagers that we appeared here in the past few days. Then do you think that we are enemies?" Xia Bingji shakes her head. "No. Otherwise the two of us would not have lost our memories." Lu Xiaoyi continues. He is very satisfied with this little wife, just that she is a little immature. She will be fine after some training. Nothing is perfect, and his hobby is not absolute. If we are not enemies, then are we strangers? Xia Bingji lowers her head even more. "No. They said that you have been protecting me in the water." Lu Xiaoyi takes out a jade silkworm from his waist and says softly, "This jade silkworm is not mine. Is it yours?" Xia Bingji blushes. She also takes out a small jade silkworm from her waist and puts them together. They are a pair. My mother made this for me. I have been carrying it with me since I was a child. Lu Xiaoyi makes the final decision. I said this is a token of love. You don't object, right? Seeing that Xia Bingji was silent, he knew that a woman would be in this state when she heard this letter from a strange man. But he didn't want to give up. He was just like this. It was not bad to lie to a wife when he was exploring the truth. Besides, it may not be a lie. It may be true. Others may be very innocent when they are pushed back to their teens, but he is not. Even if he is pushed back to his infancy, he will still have the distracting thoughts. Because he has a previous life, how can he push it back? I don't want to take advantage of you, Bingji. But we aspiring cultivators have to be honest with each other. Only when we understand the relationship between each other can we proceed to the next step. Am I right? Xia Bingji bravely raises her head. You are right. It's very likely that we are together. Chapter 792. Lu Xiaoyi naturally held her hand. The woman struggled a little, but could only let him be. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You should get used to all this. We might have done something even better than holding hands. Just kidding. Now our question is, where is this place? Xia Bingji finally returned to normal. It's Feng Shui country. I've asked around. There are a total of 3 countries here, Feng Shui, Jinhe, and Xiong. This formed the entire region. But as for what this region is called, no one knows. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Yes. And did you notice that the people here are very unfamiliar with cultivation? And I haven't sensed any qi yet, so we can't be sure whether this is a cultivation world or not. But if the people here don't know about the cultivation world, then it means that this is a place where you can't cultivate. Xia Bingji was very disappointed. We can't go back. Lu Xiaoyi held her hand tightly and encouraged her. Life is diverse. Cultivation is a way of life. A mortal's life is also a life. Everyone has their own merits. If you think you are happy, then you are happy. If you think that becoming an immortal is your goal, then you will never be happy. Let's do what we can and be happy for each other. Isn't that good? Xia Bingji looked at him gently. She somewhat understood why she chose this person to be her Tao companion. He could solve her worries, enlighten her mind, and make her happy. We have to go out, to get to know this world, to do our best. If we can't do it, then at least it proves that we have tried. If we succeed, then we are lucky. If we fail, then what is there to worry about? Xia Bingji was disappointed. If, in the end, we can't find a way home, Lu Xiaoyi laughed, then we will have a lot of children and let them continue to search. What was the relationship between the two of them? Actually, Lu Xiaoyi wasn't sure either. The relationship between people was too complicated. They lost their memories together and fell together. They could be friends or Tao companions, but they could also be enemies. They had perished together. That kind of relationship was more likely. There was no concrete basis to judge it. Most importantly, do you want to become my friend or Tao companion? Or as an enemy? 100 years of cultivation meant that they could cross the river together. 1,000 years of cultivation meant that they could sleep together on the same pillow. A beautiful woman was going through this tribulation with you. If you push her out, you will be punished by the heavens. Lu Xiaoyi believed that he was kind-hearted and willing to help others. Of course, he would not reject the possibility of turning an enemy into a friend and turning an enemy into a woman. He had no psychological barriers. He would do it first and think about it later. Taking advantage of the situation first was the real starting point of all his words. Of course, in such an unfamiliar environment, it was important for 2 people to help each other. If they could recover their memories, 2 people would recover faster than 1 person. His memories had regressed to the point where he had sensed qi. In fact, what had regressed was not only his cultivation, but more importantly, his personality, mentality, philosophy, and worldview. In this aspect, the woman was in a worse state than he was. She was now a girl in the prime of her youth. Not to mention her real age, that was her mental age. She was at the age where she was most easily deceived, influenced, and abducted. If he didn't abduct her now, when would he? Lu Xiaoyi was different. He was a soul of 2 lives. Even if he had regressed to the point where he had sensed qi, he was still very experienced and knowledgeable. Under his sunny appearance, he was full of evil tricks. Therefore, he knew what he had to do in a short period of time after waking up. When Xia Bingji was most confused, helpless, and out of her wits, he should take advantage of her. His words were not completely unreasonable. However, if he had to say a lot of reasons why they were enemies, he could still find a lot of reasons. He had to influence the woman before she fully recovered her consciousness. He had to subtly influence her and make her think that everything was like this. He had to make her believe that this was the only explanation. It might be a bit shameless, but this was how men and women got along. A good man didn't have a good wife. A Lai man married a fairy. There was a profound reason behind this. Lu Xiaoyi was not Lai Han, but he respected him. He was willing to learn all the skills that Lai Han could use. Spend the rest of his life in the village and wait for death. That was impossible. We have to go out. Go out of the village. Go out of the county, prefecture, county, and travel all over the continent until we find the traces of cultivators. There may be countless difficulties and dangers from all sides of the continent. We can't retreat. We can only face it. In the secular world, this kind of thing should be done by men. Women should stay at home. But I know that you're not a woman who is willing to be ordinary. We both have a heart that seeks Tao. So, are you willing to go with me? Xiao Bingji's eyes lit up. She felt very lucky to have such a courageous, daring, and responsible Taoist companion in the time that she lost her memories. Things should be like this. How could she have chosen the wrong person? How could she promise to marry him? I am willing. We can help each other in times of need and never leave each other. We can pretend to be husband and wife. Lu Xiaoyi's smile became more and more contagious. The little white rabbit was already in the jar. The next step was to find a suitable opportunity to eat her up. He couldn't be too fast, or he would startle her. Also, he couldn't play spiritual games too slowly. Only a fool would do that. Moreover, maybe they were really Taoist companions and had already practiced dual cultivation. Now, he was just reliving the old dream. He found a reason for his shamelessness. We are husband and wife. We are not pretending. Before leaving, they still needed to solve the problems in the village. No matter if the people in the village still regarded them as monsters, kindness was kindness. Although they didn't have the ability of cultivators, they had the heart to repay kindness and end karma. But the problem was I have 19 rings on my body, except for the little toe on my right foot. I have them on all my other fingers. This should be the storage ring and the cultivation ring, right? It seems that I'm doing well. But the problem is, how do I open this thing? Xiao Bingji got rid of the knot in her heart and became lively. Now she had voluntarily regarded herself as someone's wife. This mentality made her very relaxed. She smiled and said, "You look like a nouveau riche. You are so ugly. I only have 9 rings. Well, my fingers are almost full. Xiaolang, I heard that this thing needs to be activated by mobilizing spiritual power, but we don't know anything about spiritual power right now, so we don't know how to use it. If we try it recklessly, it's easy to destroy the things inside. The key is that we don't know which things in the storage ring are important to us and which are not." Lu Xiaoyi was also a little worried. Isn't this sitting on a treasure mountain and starving to death? Maybe the rings on the fingers are more important? The ones on the toes don't matter? Chapter 793. In the end, the two of them decided not to open the storage ring. They were both cultivators who had yet to reach the qi sensing stage. They only knew a little about cultivation from hearsay. Due to the nature of humans being stingy with money, of course, they didn't want to act rashly. If they destroyed the resources in the storage ring that they had painstakingly accumulated for many years, it would be too late for regrets once they recovered their memories. However, they couldn't just guard the treasure mountain and ignore it. Thus, the two of them reached a consensus. They would first explore this continent for 3 years. After 3 years, if they still hadn't achieved anything, then they would take the risk and forcefully open the spiritual ring. This was a very cautious approach because every cultivator's storage ring had a secret code. In fact, it was a special application of the mind. It couldn't be opened by force. Little Lang, you should put away the rings. You don't need them anyway. Wearing them makes you look like a nouveau riche. Are you waiting for people to have bad intentions? Xiao Bingji was very careful. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Wife is right. You have to take them off too, so that you won't be robbed and raped. If they couldn't touch the storage ring, then what else did the two of them have? Lu Xiaoyi was very regretful. He had transmigrated for nothing. He didn't have any memory at all. He should have hung a dog chain around his neck. He didn't have any sense of danger. He searched his entire body and found that other than Xia Bingji's little jade silkworm pendant, he didn't have anything else that could be sold. In comparison, Xia Bingji had a lot more odds and ends on her body. It was mainly jade, hair accessories, and pendants. Lu Xiaoyi felt a bit of heartache. Maybe it's useful. Xia Bingji was very open-minded. Little Lang, it's just material things. Why be so calculative? Let's get through this first and then talk about other things. You and I have hands and feet. Are you afraid of starving to death? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Then let's go to the pawn shop. Pawn shop. There will be a day when we redeem it. No matter what kind of world it was, whether it was the cultivation world or the mortal world, jade had always been an indispensable hard currency. It was just that the price was different. The two came to the county and sold Xia Bingji's body parts in a pawn shop. Both of them were generous and didn't care about the crazy price of the pawn shop. Anyway, they would get it back in the future. This was still a considerable amount of wealth. Little Bun, which Elder Su and the others all gave extra thanks and invited the entire village to a feast. They were still unfamiliar with the situation, so they couldn't do too much. After being rescued by the villagers of the village for a month, the two of them reluctantly bid farewell to the villagers. It was only at this time that the villagers began to believe that the two of them were not monsters, but ordinary humans like them. The purpose of the two of them was to pass through the provinces and counties and collect everything related to cultivation. In their impression, even a low-level cultivation planet like Lu Xiaoyi would not be completely devoid of any traces of cultivation, unless this was an out-and-out ordinary planet. In order not to waste too much time on the journey, they bought 2 fine horses, one black and one white. They also ate and lived in inns and restaurants. They were used to being extravagant. Before they even left the province, they had already run out of money and were struggling to make ends meet. They hadn't even touched the shadow of cultivation, but they had already run out of money. The two of them were a bit depressed. Lu Xiaoyi was child Sima, a master who lived like a prince. Although Xia Bingji was born in a poor family, she was outstanding and was also the apple of her family's eye. How could these two people make money? My wife. We're going to run out of money. I have to think of a way to earn some traveling expenses. It's a pity that I, your husband, am proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, classics, history, and classical stories, but I'm not interested in the art of making money. What can I do? Xia Bingji laughed. You're just a lazy young master. Why do you have to say it so elegantly? I don't care. Anyway, you have to support me. The two of them continue to be heartless. This was their nature because subconsciously, they both felt that they were not ordinary people. Since they were wearing so many storage rings on their fingers, at the very least, they should have had some when they were at the qi refinement stage, right? Maybe they were in foundation establishment. How could cultivators be forced to live? It would be a joke if people knew about it. There was a big city in front of them, and there were more opportunities in a big city. They hadn't eaten for 2 days, so they needed to come up with an idea. But there was one thing that was very strange. Although they hadn't eaten for 2 days, they didn't feel powerless at all. It was as if the hunger was only psychological and not physical. It was very strange. They didn't know that eating was just a habit of theirs. It was a habit that had lasted for more than 10 years, but it wasn't necessary. They hadn't realized this point yet. The soul returning orb could knock their memories back to the time before they felt qi, but it couldn't knock their bodies back. In a sense, the two of them had the physique of 2 human-shaped monsters, but they still thought that they were little white flowers. There was a slope in front of them, and it was a little steep. It was no problem for ordinary carriages, but it would be a little troublesome if it was a loaded vehicle. Therefore, there were always some idlers on the side of the road all day long, helping people to push carts to earn some money for alcohol. If they have the time, it's enough to smooth the road a little. Why do they have to waste time all day? Xia Bingji complained with a scarf covering her face. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're wrong. In my opinion, not only will they not smooth the road, but they will also secretly increase the slope. Otherwise, how can they make a living? While the two of them were talking and laughing, they saw a big cart in front of them. It was very heavy. The 2 horses obviously couldn't bear it. Behind them, 7 or 8 idlers shouted together to push the cart. The cart owner swung his long whip, and the horses struggled to pull the cart. One of the idlers was probably not feeling well. His companion's shoes were a little loose, and his legs were weak. He staggered and tripped the man behind him. This time, when he was in a tight spot, 3 of the 7 idlers let go of the cart. The cart stopped moving forward and began to struggle. These men were all old people who pushed the cart, and they weren't very kind. They knew that if the cart moved backward, no one would be able to bear it, and the person who tried to bear it would be in danger of breaking his leg. Therefore, they shouted and jumped to both sides at the same time. They were safe, but the 2 poor horses were dragged down the slope by the heavy cart. They slid faster and faster, and even the gods couldn't stop them. The cart owner couldn't control the horses well, and he knew that the situation was hopeless. He could only jump off the cart, fall down, and start to cry. If the cart really slid down, the food wouldn't be damaged, but the cart and the 2 horses would be destroyed. How many carts would they have to pull to earn back the money? Lu Xiaoyi and Xia Bingji were at the back. Because they were going up the slope, they had to lead the horses. For them, it was easy to avoid the out-of-control cart. The problem was that there was a little girl who had left her parents and was playing alone on the slope. The child was too young. She knew it was dangerous, but she didn't know how to run away. At this time, the cart was as fast as a rolling stone. It was dragging the 2 horses, and they were kneeling on the ground with blood all over. This scene was seen by everyone around, and they knew that something big was going to happen. Even the idlers knew that they had made a mistake, but there was nothing they could do about it. How could such a heavy carriage, which weighed over 1,000 jin, stop under the force of 10,000 jin? Chapter 794. In the blink of an eye, Xia Bingji was the closest to the child. She reached out her hand on the side of the road, grabbed the child, and dragged him back without considering her own ability. But her reaction was still too slow. The accident happened too fast. Before she could pull the child out, her arm was pressed down by the crazily spinning wheel. The wheel didn't run over because someone blocked it. Lu Xiaoyi was a little further away. Seeing his wife reach out her hand, he knew it was dangerous. He had completely forgotten that he was just an ordinary person who had not yet experienced qi. His fairy-like wife was now a one-armed person. How could he bear it? Without hesitation, he jumped, leaned forward, and used both hands to block the heavy carriage. At the same time, he finally understood what happened. Under the heavy impact, how could she survive? This time, not only would his wife become a one-armed nun, she would also become a widow. The crowd screamed. The timid ones even closed their eyes, not daring to watch this tragedy. Lu Xiaoyi supported himself with both hands, waiting for the sound of his arm breaking. Then it would be his sternum, and maybe his skull. But when he touched the carriage, he felt very strange. How come when he used his strength, this carriage was like a cotton carriage? Not only was the grain weightless, the carriage itself was also weightless. He pushed a little too hard and felt that the carriage might be pushed out by him. So he hurriedly grabbed it. Under the dumbfounded gazes of the surrounding crowd, the young man who rushed out easily pushed against the car with his buttocks. He then lifted the car with one hand and helped his female companion up with the other. He hurriedly asked, "What's the matter? Wife, how are you? Are you hurt?" Xia Bingji didn't answer. The idlers around shouted and rushed forward. Some pulled, some pushed, and some moved stones. They all looked at Lu Xiaoyi with admiration. This kind of strength, is it possible for a human to do? Lu Xiaoyi saw that they fixed the carriage and hurriedly carried his wife, but he didn't expect Xia Bingji to struggle. There's so many people here. It's not good. I'm fine. Maybe it's just a scratch? Lu Xiaoyi grabbed her arm and opened her sleeve, revealing a snow-white forearm. He looked at it and pinched it. "Wife, you're not hurt. There's no scratch. Is it because of this hand, or is it somewhere else?" The 2 of them ignored the compliments of the crowd and spurred their horses away. They were silent the entire way, and when they neared the city gates, they looked at each other and smiled. Lu Xiaoyi felt a bit excited as he said, "Wife, let me see. Both of us are definitely accomplished cultivators. Not to mention foundation establishment. I'm afraid he'll have great achievements in chi refinement. Xiao Bingji was also very happy. You have the ability to lift 1,000 pounds, and I have the ability to make my arms as hard as steel. That's definitely something. But Xiaolang, we have the ability, but we don't know how to use it. What should we do? Lu Xiaoyi laughed foolishly. No wonder the two of us could float on the river for so many days without dying. This was what it meant to be impervious to fire and water. Wife, I know how to make money. Xiao Bingji is still too innocent. Are you going to the street to perform cracking a rock with your chest? That's a good idea. It was a quiet night in Horseman City. Two furtive figures were pacing back and forth outside a large house in a wealthy district in the east of the city. Xiaolang, isn't this good? I've never done such a thing before. Want to be inconsistent with our Tao heart? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. I've never done it before, so why can't I do it? Wife, this is robbing the rich to help the poor. I've already inquired about it. The Su family is the biggest bully in Horseman City. What's wrong with taking his money? I even helped him get rid of the calamity. Let me tell you, 90% of the money we take will be given to the poor people in the north of the city. What do you think? Xiao Bingji looks around, afraid of being caught. She still doesn't have a complete understanding of her ability. That's good, but you have to take more, otherwise it won't be enough. First, find out the time of patrolling here. Lu Xiaoyi seems to be very experienced. Xiao Bingji is on tenterhooks. Xiaolang, you seem to be very experienced. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. When I was a child, I had to sneak out of the house. This is the homework I must do. Xiao Bingji carefully calculates the time. Xiaolang, you have 45 minutes. Don't take too long. How can we climb over the courtyard wall? It's so high, and there seems to be an iron fence on top. We don't have a ladder or a rope. The courtyard wall is 5 feet high, which is really not low for ordinary people. There are iron fence on the eaves, so it's not easy to climb. Lu Xiaoyi laughs. Bring a ladder? How can you think of that? I'm going to jump over. Don't forget that we are cultivators. I think I can jump over by myself. Xiao Bingji is very worried. Can you do it? Why do I feel that it's not reliable? Why don't we go to the street and break a big stone with our chest? Lu Xiaoyi measures the pace, runs, and jumps. Xiao Bingji covers her mouth. It's not that he didn't jump over, but he jumped too high. The courtyard wall is 5 feet high, but this person jumped more than 10 feet. Xiao Bingji was originally worried that he couldn't jump over, but now she is worried that he will fall to his death again. The sound of falling is a little loud in the courtyard. The two dare not make a sound across the courtyard wall. Fortunately, the defense here is really lax. Xiaolang, you scare me to death. Everyone in the city saw you jump so high. Come over quickly. Jump lightly. I'll catch you from below. Last night, the Su mansion in Homa City had been robbed and suffered heavy losses. During the day, the government had sent out scouts to search for suspicious people. Of course, no one would have thought that the golden couple who lived in the best inn in Homa City and had the best room were actually robbers. Xiao Bingji had been laughing all the time. She was laughing at how the two of them had made a fool of themselves in the process of being bandits. She had never thought of such a life. It might not sound good if she said it out loud, but for the people involved, it was particularly thrilling and interesting. Xiaolang, why did you only book one room? You don't want to give up after robbing so many rooms? Didn't we book 2 rooms along the way? Lu Xiaoyi explains, you see, we are registered as husband and wife on the counter, right? Do you think it's normal for us to book 2 rooms as husband and wife? It didn't matter before because we were not robbers. Now that we are robbers, the investigation outside is very tight. Isn't it telling people that we are very suspicious if we book 2 rooms? The reason is reasonable, but Xiao Bingji feels that things are not so simple. Then it's just one bed. Xiaolang, where do you sleep? Lu Xiaoyi says seriously, wife. You see, we have been out for a few days and have been wandering around for 2 months, but there is no news about cultivation. Although the places we go are limited, in general, other places are almost the same. Since we can't get the news from here, we should start from ourselves. I heard that the cultivator's body is a treasure. We have each learned about our own body for several months, but we still can't figure out. So what if we change our perspective and feel? There's a saying in the cultivation world about double cultivation. Maybe we can remember everything after double cultivation. Chapter 795. Xiaolang. Is this dual cultivation posture right? Yes, yes. Don't be nervous. Relax. Xiaolang. I don't think this is dual cultivation. It's all the same. Cultivation is also life. Life is also cultivation. Come, it's your turn. Xiaolang. Do you remember anything? Not yet. Wife, don't think about getting it done overnight. You have to do it slowly. After a few more dual cultivation sessions, you'll remember you're lying. You're obviously using the dual cultivation memories as an excuse. I remember now. I really remember. My qi entering Tao might be related to insects. Yes, that's it. But there's nothing else. Wife, do you remember anything? I seem to remember something too. That day was the day of the ice. I went outside the city to play in the water. Xiaolang, you've only thought of this much. How long do you have to think? Lu Xiaoyi said firmly. If you want to grow old, you'll do it. The woman said softly. Actually, you can think about it a few more times a day. The two of them walked forward like a real husband and wife, searching for their answers. Knowing that the body was a treasure, their jumping, running, strength, and speed were completely different from ordinary people. Moreover, their bodies were like Vajra, invulnerable to swords and spears, and immune to all diseases. With these conditions, it was easy to do some business along the way. Xia Bingji had also completely adapted to this life. She became a lookout and finally became one of the main culprits. Of course, she still had to think about it a few times a day. Under Lu Xiaoyi's suggestion, cultivators should be in harmony with the natural environment. This way, they could recover their memories faster. Therefore, they couldn't always think about it in the room. They had to think about it in the wild, on the boat, on the tree. Immediately, whenever they wanted, Xia Bingji resisted at first. But as her memories recovered faster, she gradually accepted this way of remembering. There was nothing more important than searching for lost memories. They had already been in this place for half a year, but there was still no news of cultivation. The two of them no longer searched around the world. Instead, they found a mountain peak with beautiful scenery and few people. They built a straw hut on the peak and lived there. This place was very inconvenient. There was only one reason why they had come here. They had all recalled the foundation establishment stage. In other words, they could now fly. There was no need to search anymore because there was no spiritium in this world. Without spiritual opportunity, there would be no cultivation. Without cultivation, there would be no cultivators. Other than themselves, there was no one else they could rely on. Some of the storage rings could already be taken out, and in their current situation, they didn't need many survival resources. As cultivators, the only two cultivators in this world, they were well aware of the laws of the Great Tao. In the past, it didn't matter if they didn't have their memories, but now that they had the memories of Foundation Establishment, the methods of Foundation Establishment weren't too suitable to reveal themselves in the mortal world. Since it was a mortal world, they should maintain its original development path and not easily influence it, even if they now had the ability to do so. Finding a mountain peak to live in was a cultivator's instinct. It was also a form of respect for the rules. It was also a form of self-exile. Xia Bingji finished her breathing and walked up the steep stone path. Soon, she saw Lu Xiaoyi standing alone on the peak. Although the mountain wind was fierce, it was nothing to cultivators like them. Xiaolang, you've been here since yesterday. Is something the matter? Maybe you'll feel better if you tell me. Lu Xiaoyi held her outstretched hand. They were already an old couple. It's nothing. Yesterday, my mother passed away. Since the two of them began to recall their memories of Foundation Establishment, slowly, they began to have reservations about each other's memories. Moreover, it was foreseeable that they would keep more and more of their private matters. It wasn't that they didn't trust each other, but a cultivator's personality without secrets was not a complete personality. Not all secrets should be shared. They always had to leave space for each other to think about their own matters when they were alone. But for a husband and wife, this was a bit cruel. If it wasn't handled well, it would bring about separation. Lu Xiaoyi took a deep breath. In the past, the progress of our memories was measured in days. Later, it began to be measured in months. Every morning when we opened our eyes, it was the happiest time for us because we could read another month's memories. Now, it began to be measured in years. I know that my mother left a long time ago, but no matter who caused us to fall into this situation, I will be grateful to him for giving me such a period of time to think that my mother was still alive in this world. Xia Bingji understood his feelings very well because she was the same. Many people in her childhood memories had become clear again because of this amnesia. Maybe in the process of our cultivation, these memories will become fainter and fainter until only a thought is left. Even the voices and smiles of our loved ones are no longer clear. It shouldn't be like this. If one day we return to normal, I will take out the previous memories from time to time to dry, organize, recall, and collect them. Even if we have to go very far in the future, we shouldn't forget those people and those things that we once passed by. Misfortune could be a blessing in disguise and a blessing in disguise. If the two of them could successfully survive this encounter, at least in terms of mental state, they would be able to take a step forward. This was cultivation. Therefore, when you rejected danger, you actually rejected the opportunity. Foundation establishment. Why haven't I met you yet? Lu Xiaoyi sighed with emotion. Xia Bingji smiled faintly. This can only expose the lie that you have been deceiving me to do dual cultivation all this time. Maybe the relationship between us wasn't that close in the first place, and everything was just a coincidence. Little Lang, what if in the end we find out that we are irreconcilable enemies? What should we do? Lu Xiaoyi held her in his arms. That won't happen. Enemies are the kind of feeling that when standing together, there will be sharp opposition in the subconscious. Although we have lost our memories, we haven't lost our subconscious. I don't think you are an enemy. What about you? Xia Bingji sighed. I used to think about it every day and couldn't wait to recover all my memories. But I don't know why, but now I'm not so anxious. But when I'm not so anxious, the memories become faster and faster. Lu Xiaoyi smirked. You have already begun to be attached to dual cultivation. It doesn't matter. I will accompany you to the end. Xia Bingji broke free and made a graceful turn in the air, saying, That's not it. This means that the memory recovery has nothing to do with dual cultivation. You have been lying to me from the beginning. Little Lang, you're a big bad guy. Memory could be a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on how you look at it. Maybe for cultivation, it is a good thing to recover. But for love, it might be a bad thing. Who knows? Chapter 796. Memories began to surge like a tide. Lu Xiaoyi would see Xia Bingji in a different state every day. Similarly, Xia Bingji would also see Lu Xiaoyi in a different state every day. Under the rapid changes in their auras, an indescribable uneasiness was quietly growing. It was unknown when it started, but the two of them no longer thought about their memories together, because the current them were no longer the same as before. In this continent, they had only known each other for less than a year, but if they added their memories together, it would be hundreds of years of unfamiliarity. Under such circumstances, if the two of them could still reminisce about their memories together, then it would be truly hopeless. It wasn't vigilance, but unfamiliarity. The two of them complained in their hearts. How should they end this ill-fated relationship? It had been almost 100 years since they formed their Dan, but their memories still hadn't crossed. Could it be that they were really a pair of wild mandarin ducks, a married couple? With a tacit understanding, Lu Xiaoyi moved to the other side of the mountain peak. Every morning at the appointed time, they would breathe in and out on the mountain peak. Being able to see each other made both of them heave a sigh of relief. Then they began to worry about tomorrow. They worried that today would be the last time they would see each other. In fact, they already had the ability to leave this continent, this world, but neither of them left. They wanted to persevere until the end, wanting to know why they had come together in such a strange way. This morning, Lu Xiaoyi opened his eyes in deep meditation. He sighed and thought about the past few years. He knew that he couldn't continue like this. Just now, he had already restored his memories to the same level as the present. As a man, he had the obligation to take the initiative no matter what would happen in the future. Arriving at the mountain peak, he let the wind blow. His heart was exceptionally clear. He didn't expect that in his relationship with the two female cultivators of Huangting Taoism, the one who came together in the end was actually Xia Bingji and not Inya. The affairs of the world were unpredictable, and fate made fools of people. The heavenly time had already arrived, yet she still hadn't come. For a core formation cultivator, this was an impossible mistake, and it was even more impossible for her to be lazing around in bed. Since she hadn't come, there was only one answer. Xia Bingji had completely recovered her memories like him, and then she had floated away. Walking to the side of the hut, there was a blue stone where the two of them often played chess. Two beautiful words were written on it. Liar. With a sigh, Lu Xiaoyi knew that everything was over. At least, it was over for the time being. A few days later, he also flew into the sky and looked at this ordinary land. He had stayed here for almost a year, but he only learned its name when he left. It was the Rust Continent. Of course, the local natives didn't know this name, because it was a name given from the perspective of a cultivator. The reason why it was called Rusty was because there was no spiritual opportunity here. Among all the 3,000 continents, it was the only continent that did not have the slightest bit of spiritual energy. Xia Bingji's cocoon space had brought them to such a place. He had the map of the upper realm of Zhou Xian, and he knew the best way to go back. He had to find the nearest little Lu, and then enter the crack passage. There was no need for him to wander around in the thousands of Zhou Xian upper realm. It was meaningless, and he was not in the mood. Carefree continent, carefree mountain, another year had passed. On this day, several Yuanying stage cultivators were sitting upright in the Great Freedom Hall, discussing matters. For a sect like the Carefree Travel sect, the nature of its management was no different from the distant 5 rings of blue sky. It was impossible to rely on the Supremes to give orders to the matters of the domain. Once their horizons were broadened, who would pay attention to the trivial matters of the domain? Therefore, in the realm, it was normal for the Yuanying to be in charge, and the Jin Dan to be in charge. One Yuanying was obviously dissatisfied. Recently, the people below have become a little wild. We, the Carefree Travel sect, are not unorganized and undisciplined. Look at what the sect is like now. There are thousands of Jin Dan, but when you look for them, you won't even find 100 of them. Who knows where they have all run off to? If this goes on, who will take care of the sect? Do you want us, the elders, to take care of it? The other nascent soul cultivator chuckled. Senior Marshal Brother Zhao, what trouble have you encountered this time? Why don't you tell us, and we can help you think about it? There was no difference in status between the few of them in the Great Freedom Hall. The Carefree Travel sect was most annoyed by the method of ranking. Generally, the monarchs were in charge, and a dozen or so Yuanying were in charge of their own affairs. They discussed matters with each other. Now that the monarchs had been missing for a long time, they were the ones who made the decisions. In addition, there were those who were lazy, those who had things to do, those who were in seclusion, and those who wandered out of the universe. Now, there were 6 or 7 Yuanying in the Great Freedom Hall. Therefore, when he said that there was no organization and no discipline, it was actually the same as when the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. Senior Zhao sighed. The battle between Taoism and Buddhism in Shijialu is getting more and more intense. In the past 100 years, we have sent dozens of Jin Dan disciples to Shijialu. The investment is not small, but the overall situation has not been satisfactory. In recent years, the Buddhists have been faintly gaining the upper hand. I still have to send more people, but after searching here and there, the good ones are either guarding a place or roaming freely. Only a bunch of useless people are left. If we send them to Shijialu, won't it increase the reputation of the Buddhists? Shijialu was also one of the 3,000 small lands in the upper realm of Zhou Xian. It was located between the two upper sects, 10,000 Buddhas worshipping the heavens and carefree travel. It was also because of this that this was a place where the two upper sects competed with each other. For tens of thousands of years, it had never stopped. It was either the east wind suppressing the west wind, or the west wind suppressing the east wind. The sects on the small land could not stand on their own, so they could only be fence-sitters. They would follow whichever side was stronger. However, throughout history, the two upper sects' competition for this small land had always been at the level of Jindan. They had never involved the upper realm. They were not small sects like the other small sects who sometimes disregarded the rules like Red Hill. The two upper sects were great inheritances that had been passed down for hundreds of thousands of years. They were very particular in this aspect and knew the importance of controlling the situation. Senior Zhao's responsibility was to control the forces of the small lands around the carefree continent. One of the core tasks was that the traditional submission to the small lands could not be lost. There had to be some expansion. All of this required a large number of elite Jindan experts. It was not something that could be solved by persuasion alone. The 9 upper sects each had their own sphere of influence. In the crisscrossing positions, such filthy conflicts would occur from time to time. In fact, Shijialu was not the only one. However, in the current situation, Shijialu's situation was more prominent. These Yuaning were not directly in charge of the lower Jindan. They could send anyone when there was a need. If there was no need, they did not need to care about anyone else. It was simple to find someone to use. However, sometimes situations like this would occur. When there was a big change and they urgently needed people, they could not find any useful disciples. For example, the other spiritual masters, some were in charge of guarding the Jindan of the carefree continent. Some were directly in charge of the duties of the various halls and pavilions in the carefree mountain. There are also those who were in charge of interstellar missions, and so on. If Senior Zhao could not find a suitable person, he could only ask them. As for whether they would give it to him or not, it would purely depend on the relationship between them. Of course, the sex affairs were more important. In most cases, they would not refuse. Chapter 797. Since Senior Zhao had spoken, the others could not pretend to be deaf and mute. The Jindan group in the carefree travel was roughly divided into a few groups. Those who were out traveling, those who were in seclusion, those who were guarding various places in the carefree continent and nurturing talents, those who were sent to various places in the universe to lead missions, those who were in seclusion in the carefree mountain, and those who were in charge of the various halls and pavilions, as well as those who met the requirements to establish a family outside. When a Jindan was sent out for a mission, the change in position was very troublesome. It required the person's willingness and the approval of the perfected one at that time. It was impossible to change it as one wished. Senior Zhao's difficulty was that in the remaining Jindan group that did not have any missions, he could not find a few who were strong enough. The outstanding ones would always be targeted at the first moment, and he needed people who could be truly useful in the Shajiao little continent. It was very contradictory. The reason why he brought it up here was actually because he hoped that his fellow disciples would be able to transfer a few people to him to solve this problem. However, every perfected one would definitely pay more attention to the area they were in charge of. If they gave away all the good people, what would happen to the area they were in charge of? This was the disadvantage of having a group of people. Carefree travel was carefree, but it lacked a person who could stand on the overall situation and make the final decision. Seeing that everyone was somewhat silent, a perfected one who was on good terms with Senior Zhao stood out to help him out. However, he could not offend the majority of the people here. In a few areas, everyone's manpower is currently a bit tight. It's also very difficult to transfer people. Why don't we ask Junior Mo for a few people? He has a lot of talented people under him. He doesn't lack good people. Junior Mo had the lowest seniority among the group of perfected ones. However, he was in charge of a very special group of cultivators in the carefree travel who had jumped ship from other continents. These cultivators, because of their own orthodoxy, were not suitable to nurture talents in the carefree continent. Because of their loyalty, They could not stay in the carefree mountain to manage their duties. If they were sent to a domain outside the universe, it was very likely that they would muddle through and not put in any effort. However, if they were sent out to fight and kill, it was still possible. Senior Zhao was somewhat moved. He looked at Junior Mo with a questioning look in his eyes. Junior Brother Mo sighed. If Senior Brother wants people, I can't reject them. In any case, I don't have much use for them. They're basically free to roam around. As long as they don't cause trouble for me, I'm already very satisfied. However, there's one thing that Senior Marshal Brother should be very clear about. Almost all of them have some strength, but in terms of character, they are very arrogant and unruly. Their recognition of Xiao Yaoyu is also very limited. After all, we don't give them many real things here. We don't give them any cultivation methods, and the resources are pitiful. I don't know what the sect is thinking. There weren't many of them in the first place. There are only 4 or 5 of them left in the Carefree Mountain. If Senior Marshal Brother wants them, you can take them all. A Dao Master laughed. Unruly? How could he be so unruly? The reason why the sect didn't give them any fundamental cultivation techniques and resources were tight was also because they wanted to see their performance. After hundreds of years, it would naturally be normal. If they didn't put in the effort, how could they get anything? They should understand this principle. Junior Brother Mo laughed bitterly. That they didn't mess around in the Carefree Continent, but there were many who went outside and used the name of Xiao Yao disciples. From what I know, there were some who went out to do business without capital, some who killed for others, some who went to other continents to snatch treasure appraisal conventions, and some who went to Red Hill and the Chamber of Commerce to kill until rivers of blood flowed. In the end, they all came to me. I was very annoyed too. Senior Zhao was very surprised. Oh, they even dared to snatch other sects' treasure appraisal conventions? That's a lot of guts. What happened after that? Were they caught? Junior Brother Mo sighed. They snatched from Huangting Taoism. What's strange is that Huangting Taoism really didn't issue an arrest warrant for him. From what I heard, there seemed to be some other inside story, so they left it at that. Later on, this person went to Red Hill. I heard that he killed more than 10 Gene Dan individual customers in the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce there, then escaped without a trace. This was something that happened 5 years ago. Later on, this guy ran back on his own, probably because he knew that there were too many blood debts out there. He had been well-behaved in recent years. He had been staying in Xiao Yao Mountain to cultivate in seclusion. In fact, it was to avoid disaster. Perhaps after a few years, people would forget about him, and he would continue to go out and cause trouble. With just one sentence, the sect didn't give him any resources and didn't let him go out and rely on himself. I can't even answer that. Senior Zhao was very interested. All right, it's him then. He can kill people. It's good to send him to Little Sand Mountain. I hope he can be of some use. Lu Xiaoyi had been back at Xiaoyao Mountain for more than 3 years. He was immersed in cultivation all day long and rarely cared about the outside world. He couldn't be any more low-key, and he consciously tucked his tail between his legs. Life had to be balanced, and cultivation was the same. Too much iron-blooded experience could easily cause one to go berserk. He didn't want to become like that. Ju City was lost. This made him very depressed. He could feel that the sword spirit was still there, but he couldn't pinpoint its location. Of course, even if he could pinpoint its location, he couldn't go there for the time being. This was because Ju City was in the hands of a certain Yuanying swordsman. He had come into contact with him once and knew that he wasn't a match for him yet. With his current strength, he might be able to deal with a weaker Yuanying swordsman. But if it was those powerful Yuanying swordsmen, there was basically no hope. This was in line with the rules of the cultivation world. He had nothing to be unhappy about. He had to get Ju City back. Otherwise, if the 5 elements were dissatisfied, its power wouldn't be reduced by just a little bit. But this matter needed to be considered at length. He couldn't be rash. He would just treat it as if the flying sword was stored somewhere else. Sooner or later, there would be an end. He had to take the sword and kill the person. At that time, he lost his flying sword because he was suddenly pulled into the cocoon space during the fierce attack, so he lost contact with the sword spirit. This was not uncommon in battles between sword cultivators, and it was also a reminder for him, who had been going smoothly all this time. If someone were to use this kind of spatial transformation technique in future battles, what would happen to his flying sword? Could it be that he would have one less pill every time he used it? Under normal circumstances, such a situation would be impossible for a Gene Dan cultivator. This was because the Gene Dan cultivators were unable to use spatial techniques. Some of their so-called barriers were only spatial techniques that could not prevent the return of the swordsman's flying sword. But the problem was that the more he fought, the more he leaned upwards. It seemed that fighting with Yuanying had become normal. This was not a good sign. He had discovered yet another huge advantage of being an internal swordsman, and that was the fact that he didn't have to worry about losing his flying sword. In any case, it was just a virtual sword made of sword chi. It didn't matter if he lost it. When the outer swordsmen reached the stage of Yuanying and mastered the Tao of Space, they would not face this problem. Therefore, this was actually a transitional weakness. However, he didn't think that he could just ignore it. Once he achieved Yuanying, the hidden dangers would naturally be eliminated. What if he couldn't master the Tao of Space after he achieved Nascent Soul? What if he couldn't achieve Nascent Soul? Even if he could achieve Nascent Soul, how would he survive the hundreds of years before that? According to the frequency of his fights, it seemed that the remaining flying swords wouldn't be enough for him to squander. Chapter 798. Lu Xiaoyi's response was to use the Sword Light Division to solve the problem. Facts had proven that the reason why the internal swords could win the respect of everyone in the vast cultivation world was because of the unscrupulous nature of their flying swords. They were not afraid of dirt, destruction, or stealing. It was this kind of unscrupulousness that allowed them to not have to worry about what would happen to their opponents when they sent out their flying swords. Therefore, they could use their flying swords in an unrestrained manner. Their tactical system was infinitely broad. This was also Lu Xiaoyi's direction. The reason why he put the sword plate in his Naiwan palace was because he had been waiting for a big move for a long time. A big move that he didn't even dare to think about before. Therefore, he changed the sword case into a sword plate and moved the sword plate from his Dantian to his Naiwan palace. He wanted to find a way to draw the sword like the internal swords. The way to draw the virtual sword. Because only the virtual sword could form thousands of swords without any pressure. It would not be like the Big Dipper's Sword Light Division in his Dantian, where he would be as tired as a dog after forming hundreds of sword lights. When the opponent's soul returning orb invaded his body, he could have relied on his strong mental strength to resist it, but he ended up like Xia Bingji. The Sword Light Division in the form of the Big Dipper was more suitable for the last desperate throw. After throwing it out, he would become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. He needed a normal, sustainable, and continuous Sword Light Division attack system. Changing to the virtual sword did not mean abandoning the real sword. In the inheritance of the sword vein, the virtual sword and the real sword were always the two sides of the sword. One divided into two, and two combined into one. If he could successfully evolve the virtual sword, he would be able to decide when to use the real sword for long-range attacks, and when to use the Sword Light Division to form the virtual sword. This would be the final form of his swordsmanship system. It was funny to say that no one knew that he, who was regarded as a swordsmanship expert in the eyes of others, had never stopped adjusting his flying sword system since he started practicing swordsmanship. This kind of adjustment would continue and never stop until one day he could kill gods and immortals, and no one could challenge him anymore. Lu Xiaoyi's sword was always not so indomitable and gave people the feeling that he was the ruler of the world. This was because he was always challenging the system of swordsmanship, sharpening a sword for 10,000 years. Frostblade is often tested. When a sword moves, who dares to make a fart? His preparations had started a long time ago. To be more specific, ever since he arrived at Blue Sky, he had a vague goal, a prototype. Then, he had been perfecting the framework. Because the direction was unclear, he could not try it out. He had been building the theoretical foundation. After returning to Carefree Mountain, he began to finalize his sword light splitting method. Previously, he had always thought of using the inner sword's sword pill method, the outer sword's illusory sword form method, and the sword disc's mana distribution method to make up for his shortcomings. But as his understanding of flying swords deepened, he slowly realized that this so-called using the strong points to make up for his shortcomings was simply piecing things together. Not all good things would be good when put together. It could also be a mishmash. Liu Xiaoyi decided to try several new methods. After 3 years of continuous failure, he began to have his own unique theory of swordsmanship. Mana came out from his dantian. Under the guidance and control of his spirit, it vibrated the mustard seed space where the sword disc was at a very high frequency. Under the normal order of swordsmanship, the sword disc should shoot out the mud ball to form a physical flying sword. But his method was to not let the flying sword straighten, not let the sword disc out of the mud ball. Vibrate, straighten, vibrate, curl, and vibrate again. In the mustard seed space, when this frequency reached a certain level, the sword disc would always be in a state of being ready to be launched. Meaningless? No. The meaning was that when the sword spirit was repeatedly stimulated in the Tao state, the illusory sword would be produced. That was the Tao state, the killing force, the urge to devour blood and explode in the strange vibrations. The faster the frequency of the vibration of the mana, the denser the illusory sword would be. It integrated the master's understanding of the Tao state, the use of force, and the attainments of swordsmanship. There was no sword decay. The only difference was that it lacked a physical flying sword and could not bring out the advantage of the top materials. But why would such an illusory sword need to be sturdy? It was just a one-time consumption. This was not a sword pill, but its effect was no different from a sword pill. So far, the theoretical foundation of the sword light division was established. What was left was how to expand and deepen it. For example, how to quickly increase the frequency of the vibration of his mana and spirit. While increasing it, how to evolve from a fixed frequency to a variable frequency. How to control these illusory swords after they left the body. How to condense them. How to split them. How to deal with the sword decay after the sword light left the body. Countless problems were waiting for him, but with the control theory of the inner sword and sword pill, all of this was not completely without a clue. This kind of sword light division had many advantages. First, when the first illusory sword was launched, there was no sword decay. Then, when it continued to be divided, there would be sword decay. This was stronger than the first sword of the inner sword having sword decay. Don't underestimate this small difference. When the sword light was divided into thousands and thousands, this small difference could be fatal. Secondly, the consumption of mana and spirit was extremely small because the way it was stimulated was not by impact, but by vibration. As long as he had enough control over his mana and spirit, he could achieve the effect of launching the sword with an extremely small price. In other words, he could possibly have the ability to continuously launch the sword light division. This was a milestone improvement. Unexpectedly, he was no longer afraid of his opponents grinding his cultivation. If Liu Xiaoyi was willing, he only needed to stop the vibration of his mana and spirit. At this time, what would appear would be the sword disc itself coming out of the body, which was also the transformation into a physical state. In the end, he abandoned the method of using the physical flying sword to carry out sword light division. This was also the result of careful consideration. The separation and aggregation of matter was a very complicated process. Even if it could be done, it would also needlessly consume a lot of energy, mana, and spirit. The flying sword was launched to kill people, not to waste energy on how to control the form of matter. This was also in line with his understanding of matter from his previous life. If a flying sword was split into two, its weight would be reduced by half. If it was split into 100 pieces, its weight would be almost negligible. Then, what was the advantage of a physical sword? If one's realm was high enough, one could form a physical sword out of thin air. Then, If a physical sword was split into 100 pieces, it might be possible to make each piece as heavy as the main body. However, forming a physical sword required price. The conservation of energy also existed in the cultivation world. If a flying sword weighed a kilogram, wouldn't you need to spend energy to create 100 pieces of material that weighed 100 kilograms? To a cultivator, it was an additional expenditure of mana and spirit. Therefore, in terms of sword light division, this kind of sword technique was specially prepared for the illusory sword. This was the reason he had thought about it for many years before he finally understood. Chapter 799. There were still many things that needed to be solved. For example, he had 7 sword plates, and now there were 6. Then, could he shake the interspatial space of the 7 plates at the same time? Would this affect each other? How could he minimize the effect? Or follow some kind of rule? These were all things that he had to continuously experiment with in the future. Of course, with so many advantages, there must be disadvantages as well. He could see and feel the disadvantages. On the top of his head, where his Ni-1 palace was located, a copper coin-sized scalp had become barren. Regional baldness. This made him very troubled. Why was it not the same when the sword chi rushed out of his head? This required further research. His name was Lu Xiaoi, not Little Baldy E. Little Baldy Lu. Just as he was about to continue working hard and spend hundreds of years in the Carefree Mountain to improve his cultivation and swordsmanship, a Carefree order came. After entering the Carefree Travel sect for dozens of years, this sect finally remembered that there was someone like him. In the side hall of Great Freedom Hall, Lu Xiaoi stood respectfully. In the hall, a Yuaning spiritual master sat cross-legged, sizing him up without the slightest scruple. 1 year. You have been in the sect for so many years and have caused quite a lot of trouble. If it were another sect, such as your original 7-color sword sect, it might not be able to protect you. Lu Xiaoi appeared very humble. Wasn't this to remind him not to forget the potential benefits of being an inner-sect disciple? Martial uncle is wise. If I was still in the 7-color sword sect, this disciple would not have such guts. Isn't this like having to spread your wings and fly after climbing the parasol tree? The Yuaning spiritual master was very pleased to hear this. This foreign disciple's temperament was a bit wild, but at least he knew the ways of the world. You can call me Martial Uncle Zhao. Carefree Mountain does not deliberately use a Taoist name. I will use my real name, as long as it is casual. Our sect has some problems in other small continents, stopping at Jindan. We want to send a few capable disciples to take care of it. I called you here today to know if you are willing. Do you have time? Did it disrupt your original cultivation plan? One good thing about the orthodoxy of free and unfettered travel was that it respected cultivators regardless of their realms. It was also a part of their orthodoxy's ideology. It was unique in the Zhou Xian upper realm. It was also extremely rare in the entire universe's cultivation world. Therefore, when there was a need, unless it was a major event that involved the survival of the orthodoxy, the sect would seek the cultivator's opinion on the sect's arrangements in advance and see if there were any personal plans that could not be avoided. The sect would respect the cultivator's personal wishes to the greatest extent. Such an approach was indeed very humane. Perhaps it could only exist in a cultivation environment like the upper realm of Zhou. If it were somewhere else, it would not be a carefree journey, but a gloomy one. This method also caused them to be at a disadvantage when competing with the other upper sects in the surrounding small realms. They appeared to be slow in responding, and good steel was often not used on the edge of the blade. Of course, there were consequences. The first rejection could be forgiven, but the second rejection would cause the elders to be prejudiced. As for the third rejection, it was possible that one would not be able to receive any missions from the sect in the future, and all the good things would no longer have anything to do with one. This was for the cultivators of the free and unfettered travel. Lu Xiaoi knew that for outsiders like them, even a single rejection could cause consequences. He needed to survive in the free and unfettered travel, and he also needed to gain the favor of the higher-ups. Not only did he need to raise his realm, but he also needed to raise his status and have the opportunity to interact with the elders. Only then could he better complete his mission of finding out secrets. Therefore, he was very straightforward. This disciple has been in the free and unfettered travel for dozens of years, and has always felt deeply regretful that I have not made any contributions. There are always arrangements for cultivation, but this disciple is willing to give up the small arrangements and obey the big ones. If Martial Uncle has any ideas, just tell me. This attitude was very proper. No matter what his true thoughts were, a disciple who did not cause trouble for the elders was a good disciple. Taoist Master Zhao did not expect it to be so easy. He originally thought that he would be coerced and tempted, but since he was sensible, he did not mind giving a sweet date first. I know that you lack materials, yet you still went to the Yellow Court continent. Actually, in my free and unfettered continent, some materials are not inferior to other continents. If you have any needs, feel free to tell me, and I will do my best to arrange them for you. Since Lu Xiaoyi had already pretended to be a wolf, of course, he would not give up halfway. Thank you, Martial Uncle, for your help. This disciple is from the Sword Vein Orthodoxy, so I do not need much. I have already gathered all of them in the Yellow Court continent, so I will not increase the burden of the sect. In the future, when I need them again, I will ask again. Taoist Master Zhao was even more satisfied. What he said just now was not true. If this guy's request was a bit excessive, wouldn't it be awkward for everyone? This was very good. Sensible. Knowing when to advance and when to retreat, he was worth nurturing. All right, since you have this awareness, I will get straight to the point. Shajiao Little Continent has always been the focus of my free and unfettered travel and 10,000 Buddhas facing the heavens. The battle between Taoists and Buddhas has a long history. I will not talk about the history. Let's just talk about the present. There have always been three local forces. 100 years ago, there were two who were close to Xiao Yaoyu, and one of them was biased towards Buddhism. However, in the past 100 years, the situation has changed. Now, Xiao Yaoyu only has one support in Shikalu. The other one has changed sides decades ago. The Buddhist power is surging, and it is coming fiercely. The purpose of sending you there is to find a way to reverse the disadvantage of my free and unfettered Taoist sect. How about it? Do you have confidence? As he spoke, he threw over a jade slip. On it was the history of the dispute in Shajiao Little Continent in recent years, the direction of history, the arrangement of the sects, and so on. Basically, it described the changes in the strength of Shajiao Little Continent in the past 100 years. Lu Xiaoyi looked at it very carefully. After reading it, he pondered for a moment before saying sincerely, as described in the jade slip, both sides cannot invest more than 10 Jin Dan in Shajiao Little Continent. This is a restriction to avoid a war between cultivators. However, a snake does not walk without a head, and a bird does not fly without a head. Who is the leader of the 10? Who is the leader? If I only go as a fighter, I'm afraid that Martial Uncle can't ask for too much in the end. Of course, Taoist Master Zhao could tell that this was single-eared asking for the right to command. His courage was big enough, which was in line with what he had done since he entered the sect. But this was impossible. A sect had its own rules. For this kind of comprehensive work to preside over a continent, one must first have a red seedling. It was not something that a foreign cultivator could touch. This had nothing to do with battle strength. This was the face of free and unfettered. However, he could also understand single-eared's thoughts. It was not a bad thing. He just wanted to be able to contribute to the sect. This kind of mentality was not good to attack. However, the temperament of these outsiders was too wild. If he really gave the right to preside over the continent to him, he would definitely beat his brains out. Single-eared, I can understand your feelings. Your intentions are good and worthy of encouragement. However, this is your first time in Shajiao Little Continent. The situation is unclear, the terrain is unclear, and your connections are weak. How can you open up the situation? Right now, Senior Brother Fan Tong of Shajiao Little Continent is very experienced. He is prudent and responsible. Everyone respects him very much. If you follow him and listen to his orders, you might have a chance to contribute. Yes, you should still raise your opinions. Don't hide your incompetence. If there is progress, the credit will also belong to everyone. Chapter 800. As Lu Xiaoyi left the Great Freedom Hall, he already had a plan in mind. If he was the leader, he would perform well. If he was the one being ordered, he would follow the rules and do nothing. After all, he was a few hundred years old. He still understood the ways of the world. Give suggestions? Give advice? If he was wrong, the responsibility would be on him, and he would be judged as a domineering and willful person who did not listen to good advice. If he was right, the credit would belong to someone else, and he would have to endure all kinds of suppression. Why would he find trouble with this? Little Shajia continent was not his. He could do whatever he wanted. There was nothing to prepare, so he went straight to the road. He chose the crack passage because he wanted to discover something through frequent use over a long period of time. After all, the crack passage was the only known way to return to the blue sky exile grounds. Little Shajia continent was a very ordinary continent, no different from the other 3,000 unorthodox continents. It had no special features, whether it was the scenery or the people. The reason why Taoism and Buddhism fought so hard over it was because it was coincidentally located in the center of the connecting line between the two upper sects. What did it mean to occupy it? It meant nothing. It could not be used as a bridgehead for attack, nor could it provide any substantial help to either side. More importantly, it was a psychological problem. From Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, this could be one of the few ways Zhou Xian could train their disciples in the upper realm, just like the fifth ring. The sects on Little Shajia continent were also supported by the Yuanying, but there were not many of them, and their strength might be on the weaker side. Similarly, they would not participate in the fight between Taoism and Buddhism over Little Shajia continent. This was the smartest way. No matter which side they sided with, they would attract the dissatisfaction of the other side. Therefore, it was to sit on the fence openly and brazenly. This was a rule that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. It was more widely spread Buddhism on Little Shajia continent, or Taoism had more followers. Of course, all kinds of scheming against each other, so much so that it was inevitable for them to meet on the battlefield occasionally. It was not an arena battle between 20 Taoist and Buddhist disciples. It was too superficial. On the Taoist side, there were a few carefree Jin Dan monks who were unable to bear the defeat of their believers, so they turned the literary fight into a martial fight. Unfortunately, their own strength was not enough, so they were pressed to the ground by the well-prepared monks. 2 of them were tortured to death. This was a reason why Lu Xiaoyi was sent to Shaka. The other one was a member of the free and unfettered sect. The so-called red root seedlings had long since walked in front of Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi was a substitute that Taoist master Zhao found from junior brother Mo because he really couldn't find a suitable Jin Dan. Because he didn't know the specific ability, character, and loyalty, he didn't dare to send more foreign defectors like him. In other words, in terms of background, among the 10 Jin Dan and Shajia Little Continent, his status was the lowest. This was the reason why he had to be a bystander. That's fine too. I'm just idling around anyways. I don't need to bear the main responsibility. If the sect wants to punish me, I'll have someone stronger to shoulder the blame. Brother Fan Tong? Why did this name sound so familiar? It was very close to Shaka Little Continent through the crack. It was only a 2-day journey, and this was under the condition that it was not good to run at full speed inside the crack. Inside the crack, there were cultivators crisscrossing, rushing to different destinations. Unless they were familiar with each other, most of them just nodded in greeting. This was the territory of the free and unfettered wanderers. Most of the people coming and going were fellow disciples, so there was no need to worry about safety. But when he approached the exit, a monk flew in front of him. The two met at the exit. They were both civilized people and were very polite. "Bald donkey, please." Lu Xiaoyi bowed. "Mixed hair, please." The monk put his palms together. Lu Xiaoyi took a step back. This poor Taoist is free and unfettered 1 year, a virtuous master. How dare I be first? The monk retreated a few feet. This poor monk is 10,000 Buddha green eyebrows, and has always respected morality. Of course, I am willing to be second. Lu Xiaoyi retreated again. Free and unfettered. Why are you so suspicious? There are gods 3 feet above your head. Won't the gods protect the body behind your head? Green eyebrows retreated again. 10,000 Buddhas are merciful. Why are you so paranoid? There are gods 3 feet above your head. Even the gods are wary of villains. At the exit of the crack, when a cultivator was about to leave, there was a possibility of being sneak attacked by the cultivators behind. The key was that you couldn't fight back because part of the cultivator's body had already gone outside. The rules tacitly allowed that you could only go forward. If you wanted to come back, you could only come back after completely leaving. There was no such thing as sticking your head out of the crack while your body was in the crack. Therefore, most lone travelers would be very concerned about whether or not there was anyone beside them when they went out. It was fine if it was their friends and family, but if there were strangers, especially those who were obviously hostile to them, they would definitely not be the first to leave. The time taken to leave was very short, but for cultivators of their level, it was more than enough time to sneak attack once. This was not the time to have noble character and unquestionable integrity. It was very dangerous to develop such a habit. The profession of cultivator was also far from being as noble as the mortal world thought. As for after leaving, the people who came later did not have to worry about being attacked by those who went out first. This was not a problem because there were cultivators guarding the crack entrance of every continent. There was no chance to attack. The two of them pretended to be calm until they retreated to a safe distance. Then, the monk floated forward, saying that there was an intruder, and went out. Lu Xiaoyi paused for a moment. When he went out, there was no trace of the monk. There were 2 Jin Dan guarding the crack entrance. They were both local cultivators. This was also the rule of the upper realm of Zhou. It was impossible to allow free and unfettered or 10,000 Buddhas to interfere. That would be crossing the line. Is that monk also here to cause trouble in Shajia? Lu Xiaoyi asked casually. The 2 local Jin Dan were embarrassed. What was the difference between them and him? However, they did not dare to say that out loud. They were both masters of the sect. It was not good to offend them. That's right. Buddhism replaced a few people. It's different from Taoism adding 2 people. Lu Xiaoyi thanked him politely and leaped up. He looked in a certain direction and flew away. His primary mission here was to find the organization before anything else. This was not a place where he could play the hero alone. Looking down from the sky, the topography of Shajia was in his eyes. Similar to Red Hill, this was a small continent of 2,000 to 3,000 miles. The topography was very simple. It was mainly plains with few mountains. The agriculture was very developed. Other than that, he could not see anything else. There were 3 forces in Shajia. High Bone Sect was a body cultivator, Middle Blood Sect was an inheritance of the Blood River, and Lower Ghost Sect was a spirit cultivator. They were all unorthodox sections. They were far from orthodox Taoism. Therefore, there was no problem of being close to anyone. High Bone Sect had always been Buddhism's territory. Buddhism was prosperous under its rule. Now that it had taken over Middle Blood Sect's territory, it had a slight advantage in Shajia. The territory left for free and unfettered travel was limited to Lower Ghost Sect. Taoism was more popular, but it was also being nibbled away. The place he wanted to go was Lower Ghost Sect. A group of people who played with ghosts was very fresh. Chapter 801. 3,000 miles of little continent. It was not a big place, so he arrived in an instant. He took out the Xiaoyao knot and shook it slightly. This was how the disciples of the Xiaoyao sect communicated with each other. Within 100 miles, they could sense each other clearly. In an instant, there was a response. On the plain below, there was a Taoist temple that responded to him. It was an invitation. He did not hesitate and went straight down. The next moment, he was standing in a magnificent hall of a Taoist temple. There were 6 Taoists sitting in a circle around him. They were all looking at him. "Junior brother, you don't look familiar. May I know which sect you are from? Who is your master?" One of the Taoists asked. He looked solemn and righteous. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and he had an imposing manner. Lu Xiaoyi knew why he was hesitating. He did not ask anyone to find out his background. He went straight to the point. "Single ear. I am from Little Continent. I have been in the sect for 20 years and have never had a master. This time, I was sent by Master Zhao to come to Shaka Island to listen to his teachings. I want to do my best. May I know which one of you is Senior Brother Fan?" The Taoist who spoke sighed in his heart. However, he did not show any disappointment on his face. This was the most basic cultivation of a Taoist. He was hoping for a senior apprentice brother to come. Currently, on planet Shajia, it was difficult for Taoists to develop their followers. He was here reluctantly, but he did not have any particularly good ideas. Therefore, he hoped that the sect could send 2 capable assistants. A few days ago, the junior apprentice brothers who came were somewhat passable. It was not that they were weak, but they were a little far from his expectations. The last one was even better. He was simply a newly attached cultivator. Was the sect lacking in manpower to this extent? Or did they not want to come because they knew it was difficult to change the situation? "I am Fan Tong. Junior Brother Dan, please sit down. You and I are senior brothers. Since we are fated to work together, don't be too polite. I will not deliberately take care of any arrangements. You don't have to hide any thoughts. This way, it will be easier for everyone to get along." Lu Xiaoyi nodded and found a seat at the end to listen to the discussion. They were talking about where a new Buddhist temple had been built, where people at the bottom of society had begun to believe in Buddhism in private, and so on. Shaka Little Continent, Upper Bone, Middle Blood, and Lower Ghost. These 3 powers were named Upper, Middle, and Lower Ghost. It was not based on their strength or the size of their territory, but rather their topography. Although it was a flat plain, it was a gently sloping plain. Lower Ghost Sect had the lowest topography, but in terms of the territory they controlled, Lower Ghost Sect controlled the most mortals out of the 3. The difficulty lay in how to protect the incense of Taoism in this place, and not let the Buddhist faith take over the market. They also had to wait for an opportunity to recover the territory of the Blood Sect that they once owned but now lost. In terms of the penetration of the mortal world, Taoism was not as good as Buddhism. It had to be admitted that Buddhism had a system that specialized in the mortal world. It was very systematic, very high, and very influential. It was not something that Taoism, which had always been about peace and quiet, could compare with. This was a congenital disadvantage that could not be easily changed. It was about the same old content. There were no special tricks, but in Lu Xiaoyi's view, such a defense could not stop the penetration of Buddhist faith. However, he did not say anything and just listened. Fan Tong's words were very beautiful when he greeted him, but during the discussion, he did not ask him anything. This was the real attitude. Lu Xiaoyi understood that it was important to know oneself well. Finally, it came to an end. This kind of encroachment of faith took at least 10 years, so in fact, everyone was not too concerned. The fire had not reached their door, had it? In their view, although the loss of the Blood Sect's territory was very helpless, after all, it was a place where 2 sides fought in history. It was normal to have gains and losses. Wasn't it fine to go to the Ghost Sect's territory? First, defend, then counterattack. This was the way of thinking of the free and unfettered people. Fan Tong finally remembered that there was a newcomer among them. So he opened his mouth and said, "Junior Sean, you are new here and don't know much about the local environment. I wonder if you know the specific way we preach in Shaga?" The so-called free and unfettered people's way was actually very simple. It was to divide the territory and take care of it. For example, the only territory left in the free and unfettered travel was the Ghost Sect's territory. The free and unfettered people's way was to divide the territory into 8 parts. 8 people were in charge of 1 part, and the remaining 2 people were mobile. If there was a serious Buddhist invasion, they would send more people to help stabilize the territory or act as the vanguard in the spread of Taoism. Of course, this was not possible now. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "I have a general understanding, but I'm not very clear about the specifics. The time is too short. I will familiarize myself with it as soon as possible. His attitude was very proper. This was also one of his goals. Don't look at the Jindan here. Their strength may be far inferior to his, but when it came to background, he was far inferior to these free and unfettered cultivators from the free and unfettered land. Their connections could not be seen. Perhaps his efforts could not compare to a word from these people behind the free and unfettered mountain. This was because his foundation of connections was too weak. He was originally an outsider, but he did not try to make connections. Instead, he spent most of his 20 years in the free and unfettered mountain. Now, it was time to change this impression. He needed to be closer to the upper echelons, and he needed to have a good reputation. Fantong was very satisfied with his attitude. The reason why he had not given him any tasks was because he was secretly observing this person. Outsiders were wild and did not know the rules. This was something everyone knew. He was worried about a green melon who did not know anything and came up with random ideas. If he did not listen, he would lose face, but if he listened, it might not be meaningful. This was good. This guy had been quietly listening without saying a word. This was very sensible. They were already a little restrained, and there was no need to add an internal danger. Therefore, he was willing to arrange an area with less pressure for him to familiarize himself with the situation in Shajia. Baqian province is the largest area in the Lower Ghost sect. It is also the location of the Lower Ghost sect's mountain gate. The geographical location is very important, and it has a wide range. It is currently the most important area under our control. I will give this place to Junior Marshal Brother Sean. You will be the head of Baqian province, leading the spread of Taoism in the province. What do you think, Junior Marshal Brother? Lu Xiaoyi hurriedly found the location of Baqian province on the Shajiang map. He immediately understood Fantong's intention. This is Senior Marshal Brother's sympathy. Let me familiarize myself with the environment. Although Baqian province is big, it has already been controlled by Senior Marshal Brothers like an iron bucket. Why would Junior Marshal Brother need to waste any effort? Senior Marshal Brother, don't worry. Junior Marshal Brother will definitely be cautious and conscientious. I will not be a burden to Senior Marshal Brothers. Everyone present was very satisfied with his words. Although Baqian province was big, as he said, it was the most prosperous place in Shajia. It did not require any ability. It was just a job to eat and wait for death. Giving this place to him could be said to be a kind of preferential treatment. It could also be said that Fantong did not trust his ability. It depended on which angle you looked at it from. But at the very least, this one-eared man was not blind. He was sensible and tactful. This was not easy. It saved everyone from the trouble of training foreign cultivators. Chapter 802. Fantong said gently, "Our strength will probably be concentrated in the area bordering the Middle Blood sect. That's where our strength is the strongest. I will personally oversee it. I'll leave the rear to Junior Dan. If there are any changes, remember to contact me early. 2 heads are better than 1. It's better not to monopolize everything." Lu Xiaoyi received a so-called cushy job. To be honest, the ostracism of the carefree sect's people stopped at ideology. They were very dafa in the specific arrangements. Perhaps in the eyes of the cultivators, this was also a sign of contempt. If one had the initiative, they would do it well. If not, they would just focus on their own cultivation. The limited land of the Shajia continent determined that the cultivators here had limited space. The Lower Ghost sect's territory was slightly larger, but it was only about 1,000 miles deep. It was further divided into 8 pieces. The Lundo Dam Prefecture was only 2 pieces. 300 miles of land was not small for mortals, but for cultivators, it was very stifling. From Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, 10 Jindan on one side was already a lot. 3 was just right. In the Dam Prefecture, there were a total of 8 Taoist temples of various sizes. To squeeze 8 Taoist temples into such a small area, one could not say that the carefree sect did not work hard. However, What they faced was not something that could be solved simply by building Taoist temples. The largest Taoist temple was the White Cloud Temple. It was also Liu Xiaoyi's position, the White Cloud Temple Master. Controlling the other 7 Taoist temples in the Dan Prefecture was also a historical rule on the Xia continent. There were many ways to fight for the control of a continent. The most ancient way was a battle between Taoists and Buddhists. However, such a crude and worthless method was gradually abandoned with the evolution of time. There were too many repercussions. The people were in a terrible situation, dealing with the aftermath, the dissatisfaction of the natives, and it was easy to escalate. Therefore, Zhoxian developed until now. At least in the dispute between Taoists and Buddhists, competing in the promotion of beliefs became a popular method. There were many benefits to doing this, and it also showed that the cultivators were more open-minded. Liu Xiaoyi kept a low profile as soon as he took office. He did not call for the monastery heads of the various monasteries to meet him. He only continued to work hard in his own residence of the monastery head of the Baiyun Monastery. He continued his cultivation as well as his deep research on sword-light differentiation. In his spare time, he would wander around the land of Baqian Prefecture, observing the ideological tendencies of the people here. The results were not optimistic. The belief of the people here was more of a historical inheritance than a deep-rooted belief. Buddhism had not infiltrated the country yet, so only Taoism could be trusted. However, Taoism was relatively simple. It was not a system that could confuse people and make people follow blindly. It was more popular among the upper class, those who were knowledgeable. Its appeal to the people at the bottom was very limited. Over the past month, he had come to his own understanding of Bazian province. Regardless of whether it was the mediocre social structure or the lack of Taoist temple operations, he was very clear that the reason Bazian province could be so peaceful and worry-free was not because Taoist ideals were deeply rooted in people's hearts, but because Bazian province was located at the rear. The threat had yet to descend. There were a few things that needed to be noted that could not be seen in Taoist Master Zhao's Jade Slip. One was the indifference of the local sects towards them. They did not resist, nor did they get close to them. It was not only the lower ghost sect that was like this. In fact, the 3 forces of Shaka were like this. It was just like how Upper Bone and Middle Blood looked at the Buddhist forces coldly from the sidelines. Liu Xiaoyi had also been to Shaguwei Mountain Gate in Baqian Prefecture to visit. After going there once, he understood that the other party's attitude was that they would fight among themselves and they would live their own lives. Everyone minded their own business, and they would listen to whoever had the authority. There was no emotional distance. This was understandable. As indigenous people, how could they have a good impression of invaders? The other was that the Taoist temple could teach the Tao, but could not cultivate. In other words, the carefree sect could only cultivate mortal Taoists and could not cultivate cultivators here. There is only one way to cultivate cultivators here, and that was through the 3 local forces. This was the basic condition for the locals to tolerate them here. The world of cultivation had been developing for hundreds of thousands of years. People were progressing, and so were their thoughts. They had long passed the stage where whoever had the biggest fist could take everything. Most importantly, there were other sects watching them, so they couldn't be too unsightly when eating. After more than a month, he had a preliminary understanding of this small continent. He could now do something. He would do whatever he wanted in his position. This was his philosophy. Since he was the master of the Baiyun Monastery, then at the very least, he had to protect the Taoist forces in Bazian province. This was his responsibility. The other 7 monastery masters were invited. 1. To get familiar with each other. 2. To prepare for a rainy day. After 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, these people were all mortals. Naturally, they had to use mortal methods to communicate. Drinking on the table was the best way. While feeling dizzy, it was easier for them to communicate. It was not good to put on the airs of cultivators. Liu Xiaoyi went straight to the point. Everyone knows that the Buddhists are aggressive. Although it's still far from the dam, if you're not prepared, you'll fail. You're taking things for granted if you think you can be safe just because of the terrain. Everyone listened attentively. They knew very well what the so-called Bayun monastery master represented. It was just that they had been changing positions too frequently, so they were somewhat at a loss. It was fine if they met a cultivator who knew how to operate a mortal Taoist monastery, but if they met a hothead who gave orders without thinking, it would be very troublesome. I'll tell you the truth. If the Buddhists really come, who will be affected the most by the change of the Taoist temple? We, the carefree sect, failed in Shaga. This is obvious. But what about you? Ordinary young Taoists can shave their hair and become monks. It is very easy. You can still eat and recite scriptures. But you, the leaders of the monastery, are supervising the Taoists. Do you think the Buddhists will give you the chance to manage a place? Will you still enjoy the offerings of the villagers? Would he still be able to enjoy a respectable status? Will you still be able to eat and drink well? Will you still be the main wife in the East Village and the concubine in the West Village? There will definitely be senior Buddhists who will take over the leadership. Then, what do you think is the possibility of returning to your hometown and being a rich man when the time comes? You are all the people's hard-earned wealth. You are not wrong, right? Think about the days when you have to work in the morning and plow at night. Can you still get used to the days when you have to step on the yellow mud under the scorching sun? Can you still do it? Can you still bend your waist? Everyone was drenched in cold sweat when they heard this. This was the truth, and also what they were most worried about in private. However, they had pinned their hopes on the free and unfettered cultivator. Taoism and Buddhism had been fighting for tens of thousands of years. Would he really be kicked out? Lu Xiaoyi looked at these Taoist insects. Those who help themselves will be helped by the heavens. This is the most basic principle of the Taoists. You have all studied Taoism for so many years. Even if it is just a half-hearted story, you should have heard it, right? All the monastery masters bowed. Please instruct us. If we can help, we will not refuse. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Actually, there is no need to go through so much trouble. From today onwards, your Taoist temples will no longer accept people from good families. Don't accept people from the countryside. From today onwards, you will accept local ruffians, gangsters, ruffians, hooligans, and these people from all walks of life as your main targets. There is no discrimination in education. Our Taoists have always been committed to the stability of the place. These unstable elements must be taken in and taught well. Chapter 803. Quiet Peace Temple used to be a small temple in the central blood sex territory. Because of Buddhism's success on Mount Shaka, it had become the front finger of Buddhism on Mount Shaka. Today, the monks gathered together to review the past and look forward to the future. They were full of confidence in the future of Buddhism on Mount Shaka. A monk said excitedly, "Mount Shaka's momentum can be controlled. Believers in the mortal world, like Fushiger Buddhism, had a strong heart. Their morale would be boosted at the first spurt, then weakened at the second, and exhausted at the third. This was the habit of mortals. It was different from the persevering state of mind of cultivators. If one hoped to brew for many years before they could rise again, one would have to spend a lot of effort. Therefore, I think we should pursue the victory and not give Taoists time to catch their breath." This was the right idea, and it was also inevitable after Buddhism's promotion in the central blood sex territory was stabilized. Their momentum could not be lost, and the monks had reached a consensus. The problem now had become which prefecture to start from and how to start. There didn't seem to be any way to choose. The only way was to push forward from the current border between Buddhism and Taoism. But some people didn't think so. A young monk proposed a new idea. Since we want to strike while the iron is hot and pursue the victory, why not go straight to the root of the problem? Everyone looked at him questioningly. This was a new monk named Shui Mei. He was a disciple of 10,000 Buddhists. Before he became a Buddhist disciple, he was a famous flower picker in the 10,000 Buddhist continent. He came and went alone, and his whereabouts were uncertain. He wasn't a good person, and he didn't like women. In the 100 years after he formed his gold core, Countless nuns and nuns in the 10,000 Buddhist continent had fallen into his evil hands. This person was also amazing. Not a single one of his victims hated him. From this, one could see how skillful his methods were. It was said that later he wanted to establish a Buddhist sect, but because of his arrogance, he was restrained by a wandering old monk and became one of the glorious disciples of 10,000 Buddhist continent. Although Buddhist disciples didn't care about the past, if they were unbearable to a certain extent, it was difficult to be friends with them. Compared to Liu Xiaoyi's position in the carefree travel, he was worse. It wasn't a matter of treatment, but a matter of opinion. However, his proposal was very innovative, so the leader of the Arhats asked how to bloom in the center with infinite power. Cui Mei shook the sand map and floated it on the table. She then pointed out, if we do things step by step, it will take a long time. When the Taoists feel that they have lost their advantage, they will pay extra attention to it and make other arrangements. This is disadvantageous to us Buddhism. Therefore, it is best to sweep the acupoints in the courtyard. Sweeping the acupoints quickly is the advantage. Daemon Prefecture is the rear of the Ghost Sect and also the location of the Ghost Mountain Sect. It has always been the rear of the Taoist school in Shajia. They thought they had a solid foundation, but we all know very well that even with the Taoist doctrine, it is very difficult to win over the hearts of the people. On the contrary, it is the local Taoist temple that has repeatedly overstepped its boundaries and committed illegal acts. Their connection with the lower-class people is very weak, and their appeal is limited. The head Arhat nodded. What you said makes sense. The foundation of Taoism at the back was not as solid as the one at the front. However, how could they spread Buddhism when they were deep inside? In the Shaji continent, only mortal believers can preach Buddhism, but cultivators like us are not allowed to do so. It's almost 1,000 li away, and we can't fly. This was the key. However, Samay was already prepared. Shaji continent has a tradition of holding a ghost festival once every 5 years. When the time comes, a large number of people will gather in the ghost city of the Ghost Sect's Daemon Prefecture to pay respects to their ancestors, comfort the dead, and pray for the protection of the ghosts. I have seen the records of the Ghost Festival. It starts in February and goes all the way to the end of April, which is a process of 3 months. More than 1 million people directly participate, and more than 10 million people are limited by the itinerary, so they pay their respects at home. Among them, most of the people who personally go to the Ghost City are from the Ghost Sect. They are closer, but there are also people from the Middle Blood Sect who go. This number is no less than 100,000 in 3 months. The Upper Bone Sect is slightly further away, but there are also more than 10,000 people who go. I think this is our chance. The head Arhat was deep in thought. What you mean is that if we organize the good believers to set off with the ghost worshippers, we can preach Buddhism along the way and then spread it out in the ghost city of Yudu, shaking the foundation of Taoism in the core hinterland? Sume Arhat was disdainful in his heart, but he was very modest. Senior brother has great foresight and hit the nail on the head. However, it's best not to be too obvious along the way. We should pass through with a low profile in case Taoism uses mortal methods to screen and intercept us along the way. It's best to focus on the Daemon Prefecture that they have always thought to be infallible. At that time, tens of thousands of believers will mix in with thousands of monks and blossom in the Daemon Prefecture. Legally speaking, they will have 3 months to stay there. If they are invited to preach Buddhism, they will have a foundation to take root. The mortals won't be able to react so quickly, and they won't be able to organize. Taoist Xiaoyao also won't allow them to use cultivation methods to stop us. With us watching over them, they won't dare to act recklessly. In this way, we can open up the situation in front of the Daemon Prefecture and radiate to the surrounding areas. We can communicate with the inside and outside, and coordinate with the outside. The few prefectures of the border will naturally have no time to care about them. Wouldn't this save time, effort, and effort compared to just going from the border to flatten them? The eyes of the monks lit up. Although Monk Shui Mei's past was unbearable, he was indeed smart. Although he was new here, he had a unique vision and profound insights. He had the temperament of a master of the art of war. It was just a draft. Everyone had their own ideas. Slowly, the framework was filled in clearly. Chuime came too late and couldn't make a specific plan. He didn't interrupt and just sat quietly at the side, looking at the excited monks. He was unwilling to come here. A group of greenhouse flowers who had never really seen a bloody storm playing house here. In his life, Chuime had drunk wine, eaten meat, killed people, and played with nuns. He had walked on the edge of danger all his life. Why would he care about such a competition? Any action that didn't aim to kill the opponent was a hooligan. However, he still had to do his best for the 10,000 Buddhas, because the old monk who led him to Buddhism said that once he accumulated enough good deeds in Buddhism, he would remove the restriction on his momentum. The old monk bullied the weak. His momentum was removed. Originally, this was nothing to Jean Dan. He could just grow another one. However, the old monk seal was unique. He couldn't grow another one now, so he could only work hard to free himself. In fact, he didn't care about these so-called senior brothers. Although he practiced the wild fox Zen, his foundation was not worse than that of the 10,000 Buddhas Orthodox school. The key was that he had rich experience in fighting, which was not something these senior brothers could compare with. These stupid idiots could force the Taoists on the opposite side to retreat. It could be seen that the good-for-nothings on the opposite side were even more unbearable. However, when he came to Shaka, he met a Taoist at the exit of the crack. He was a little strange. He probably came here to fix the hole. Hopefully, it wouldn't be too troublesome. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.